6:30. I want to welcome everybody to our budget work session. I don't have anything to start off with other than we didn't quite get the flag up the way we needed to this morning, but it did get up. Mother Nature intervened and changed our plans, but the flag is up. I had to come back and watch a plumber drill a hole in my floor of the basement and replace my floor drain. So that was always lots of fun, and not as much fun as eating cookies and hanging out with you guys. But anyway, we'll get started. Mr. Engel, do you want to start off with a few comments? And
absolutely, I would echo Mayor's comments about the flag raising. Appreciate the effort the Boy Scouts put in. Was glad that council members were able to make it last night and this morning. I apologize. We did a little make it up as we go once the lightning started getting close. So we get those scouts inside and get all the visitors out of the rain. But I appreciate everybody showing up. Well, I do want to welcome everybody. I feel like someone should be handing out cookies while I walk around in front of you. I may get up and pace back and forth just because that's usually what I'm doing at this point of the budget presentation. But I do want to welcome everybody on the council, anybody that happens to be calling in from home to our budget work session. And I want to thank the council especially for accommodating our abbreviated timeline. Clearly, this is not how we would intend to go through a budget process. This is not normal for us, but it is just what we're having to do to accommodate the COVID, the pandemic. We did internally follow a budget timeline very similar to every other budget timeline, being that we started to put our budgets together in March, April, and May. So we've had we've had approved department head budgets for their folks, and from a finance director, city administrator, approved budgets for several months now. We've tried to get refreshed and reacquainted with those. Most of what we're looking at now are big numbers as opposed to those small numbers. So please bear with us if you have specific questions about small expenditures, but I'm sure we have the answer. We may have to just dig it up as we go. You should have the budget in front of you, or at least it was presented to you. Wherever you have it now is your choice. Yeah, we again, thank you for dealing with this abbreviated timeline. Hasn't been easy for us. Surely has not been easy for you. But by allowing us this abbreviated timeline, you allow us to truly get a good handle on what we believe our revenues are going to be for the rest of the year, which affects 2021, and what we think our expenditures are going to be. So, we're excited to present the budget. You know, as I say every year, the budget's more than just a spending plan. I mean, I think that a lot of people, they just look at it as a spending plan and they say, this is what we think that we're going to acquire in expenditures. This is what we think this is what we're going to acquire in revenues. And this is what we think the expenditures that we need to take care of the city. But the reality is that the budget's a value statement. I mean, it is truly what we value as a community. And I think that probably the most important thing that we do is produce this document. This is last year's, but this is what we value as a community. And when we talk about value, we're really talking about the subsidy, because, well, it would be nice to believe that there were services that we provide as a city that actually recoup cost. They don't. If there was a service that we provided, there'd be some enterprising young Merriam resident that would go out and would cut the grass for us and would fill our potholes and would provide public safety. But the reality is there's not really a profit motive for that. That's why we have cities. It's okay that we subsidize those things. But the reality is that we subsidize things in the annual budget because we value them. They say something about who we are as a community and who we aspire to be and where we've come from. So when we talk about values and things like that from a budgetary standpoint, that's really what we're talking about. You're not going to find a whole lot of things that match up in terms of, oh, the police department pays for itself or public works pays for itself. I can tell you that dog fees do not cover the animal control officer. They just don't. But we value that, so we choose to subsidize it. So Again, I think from a value standpoint, we're really excited to share that because we think that this, based on our goals and objectives, conversations we have, and just past budgets, that this really is a good value statement that represents what we, who we are as a city. So I want to just kind of give a rundown of how this is going to work. Donna and I are going to tag team the budget. When I talk about tag teaming the budget, one of the things that I think I want to share with you is that we're going to focus on our non-maintenance type items. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that about 90+% of our budget is maintenance items. We are maintaining the city, or we are maintaining values that we've already decided are important and speak to us and speak to our residents. So what and you have the details of what those are in that booklet that you've been presented, that's been published for our residents. That's really the maintenance items. And it's not necessarily maintenance like that's the cost of asphalt. That's built into those things. But those are the things that help us maintain the city of who we are. We're really going to talk about the above and beyond things that go above and beyond maintaining. It's that 5 to 10% of the budget of the things that we add, the things that are new, the things that we change. So those are going to be the things that we focus on. We will absolutely answer any questions that you have about the minutia. If you want to know office supply numbers and things like that, we will get those. We will get that information for you. We are just trying to balance what people want to know versus what they need to know in this weird environment that we're doing this in Zoom. So please do not hesitate to ask questions. We're here to request feedback. Tonight or this week is really kind of our shot to have this conversation and answer your questions about the budget. We've got a council meeting next week that we don't intend to have another budget work session, but we are fully prepared to have a budget work session based on feedback we hear this evening of things that we'd like to see changed or additional conversations we think we need to have about anything. We are fully prepared to do that. Our hope is that we do a good enough job that we don't need to do that, or we can answer some questions offline through email or through one-on-one meetings. We are absolutely committed to doing one-on-one meetings. So again, if we don't hear differently this evening, our full intention is that this is the budget we're going to present to City Council for approval, barring any major snafus on our part in terms of its presentation. So house cleaning, I guess, kind of thing. When we're presenting, we can't see you. So that was a kind of something that I picked up at the last meeting. So we're going to try and remember to have breaks and kind of say, do you have questions? There are a few places that naturally we will have breaks for questions where we can ask that. We will not be able to see you. So if we get to a point where you are lost or you have a question, you're going to have to just yell out for lack of a better word, because we can't see you. We will try to break at certain points and go, do you have any questions? So if you can hold those questions until we hit those points, that would be great. I think in terms of the CIP, I think we've done I think we have a couple spots where we know that this is a place where we're going to need discussion, so we can turn the presentation off and everyone can look at each other and have a conversation about those things. But if there's things specifically that occur in the middle of a presentation and you're looking at a shared screen, which means not this Brady Bunch thing here, then you're just going to need to yell, because we don't have any way to know that you have a question. Christine, you had a question?
Your mute's on.
I know. I was trying to turn it off. I have been in some Zooms where we actually have the ability to raise a hand, that there's an icon where we can do that. That's not something we can turn on for us.
We do have that capability, but people come into our meetings and use it as a way to maliciously take over. So that feature is turned off.
Okay. I have experienced that. It's not particularly pleasant.
Right.
So again, if there's a question, please ask it. Or if it's a question that you think it's just hey, I'd like to know more information about this, we can answer emails. Again, we are committed to meeting one-on-one over the course of the next week if that's what we need to do. Please don't hesitate to ask. So yeah, I just want to kind of make sure that I don't know if it's just a, hey, I have a question. I'll let each of you figure out how to break in if we need to break in, but we will try to make sure that in points where we think you're going to have questions, we'll ask if there's questions. So the rundown of tonight is that I'm going to cover CIP. We're going to still kind of follow the same timeline that we would if we were in a normal year. We're going to cover CIP first, and we're going to cover CIP financials. Donna's going to cover the other funds, including the general fund, along with some additional kind of fund accounting 101. I'm going to break in and share some of the new things that we have put in the budget, which you've seen that sheet. We're basically going to pull that last slide that we shared at the last meeting. We're going to talk about a couple of those items, and then Donna's going to take it home for us. And at that point in time, we can discuss, we can fall asleep, we can decide next steps. But again, I think we have a good budget we're excited about. It's a balanced budget. It does not have a mill increase. It actually increases what we think are some pretty good services that meet our goals and objectives of the city council. So with no further ado, if there's no questions, I don't think I see any questions. Then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen, which I think I can do. Okay, can everybody see that?
No.
No. Okay, let's see here.
I see. Yeah.
Let's share screen.
There we go.
How about that?
Yep.
Okay, outstanding. So I can't see anybody at all anymore, but if I'm sharing my screen, that's the most important thing. Can anybody see me?
Nope.
Okay, so I can pick my nose if I want. Okay, so what we've got here, we're going to start with the 2021 to 2025 CIP budget. You should have received two documents related to the CIP budget. You should have the capital improvement 2020 to 2025 plan. We include 2020 in there because when we normally start this in April, we would still have 2020 projects that are in there. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy between what your document says, but it still has 2020 budget projects in it. I'm not necessarily going to cover a whole lot of the 2020 projects. And then you should have also received our unprogrammed project list. Those are unprogrammed programs. I think the majority, if not all of them, are drainage. They are projects that we, for one reason or another, we either have determined that they don't raise to the level of a CIP project. They're more localized in nature. They don't do home damage. They're more surface related. But it's simply just to share that we recognize that someone has had a concern about them. So every year, as part of the CIP, we do present the unprogrammed project. So council members and members of the public know that we are aware that someone has concern about them. But we don't go through each of those. So I'm not planning on going through those unless someone requests me to do so. So 2021 to 2025 CIP budget. First thing we're going to cover is our major projects. We have two major projects that are occurring in the CIP. The first one's our new community center. As of last week, we've spent all of our bonded money. So the $24 million that we borrowed, we have spent all of that. Of the $6 million in the CIP that we set aside, we've got about $4.3 million left. And of the $6.6 million for TIF, we've got about $752,000 left. We fully intend that the majority of all of that's going to get spent, except for probably somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000 of contingency. Likely when this is all done, barring some sort of catastrophic something over there, we will have in the neighborhood of $500,000 left that will jump back into the unallocated CIP budget. So it's not reflected in the budget because we're fully expecting in terms of financially to spend all of it. But about $500,000 of that $6 million, that non-bonded GM 1802, we anticipate will dump back into the CIP and we'll be able to fund other CIP projects next year, this year, 5 years down the road. It will just jump back into unallocated. Other project that's in the 5-year CIP is Upper Turkey Creek. And as we have for the last 15 years. We've pushed that to the last 3 years of the CIP. That is essentially awaiting federal funding. That is a $37.5 million project that the feds would need to provide about $25 million for. We have secured funding from the county. We would have some in-kind easements, and what we have in our 5-year CIP over 3 years, 23, 24, 25, is a little bit north of $5 million. I will tell you, as I have in the past, that based on the pot of funding that funds these type projects, I thought pre-COVID it would be pretty tough for this project to get funded because it's competing with New Orleans and Houston and the Carolinas and Florida. We continue to share as we've had new federal reps. We've continued to share with them, the value of this to our community, the need for the downtown to have this project be funded. I know that Councilmember Neal has reached out to our federal reps, and perhaps other on the call have. But I would tell you, pre-COVID, I thought that it was a stretch. With the money that's being burnt through at the federal level at this point in time, I'm not optimistic that Upper Turkey Creek likely ever gets funded, but we will continue, because we have committed a match to it. We will continue to put that at the end of our 5-year CIP, and you will see the effect that it has on our CIP a couple slides down the road. I would propose, likely somewhere in the next couple of years, we will need to have a conversation, or we will recommend to City Council to have a conversation about, is there another more localized solution to this issue of flooding? I'm sure we could do a lot with $5 million that's in the CIP if combined with some sort of additional watershed money from the county. What those solutions are, I'm not here to say, but that's a lot of money. And I think we might have to have that conversation if we ever want to see downtown come out of the floodplain, but that's neither here nor there for right now. Next is going to be our medium projects. This is our medium project summary. So in 2021, we're recommending East Frontage Road, 67th to 75th Street. That's going to be in front of CarMax, Georgetown, and the hospital. So you're looking at your standard improvements, curb and gutter, sidewalks, streetlights where needed. We will, because it's a 2021 project, I will call this out in the next slide as a specific, in case we need to have a conversation about it. But that's East Frontage Road. In 2022, we have 2 projects budgeted. We have West Frontage Road. We would imagine that by 2022, Mr. Reed will be done with his dealership over there. Whatever's going to happen at Track B will be completed in 2021. So it'll be time for East Frontage Road from 67th to 75th Street to be cleaned up, and especially because of all the construction that's been occurring. 2022, the CARS project is downtown Merriam, from Johnson Drive to 55th Street. 2023 is 55th Street, Merriam Drive to West City Limits. 2023 also is a drainage project. We're calling it 50th Terrace in England to Kessler. That would be going from south to north. If you went from north to south, you would call it Kessler to 55th Terrace in England. It starts basically at Kessler and runs all the way down to Brown Park. It's essentially, there's an undersized pipe that runs through there, and it's taking water from those neighborhoods from Turner, and it's taking it down to Brown Park, and it's severely undersized. The reason that project has risen to importance in making it onto the CIP is because in the following year, that 49th Street, Schweitzer Road to Antioch CARS project, that pipe goes right underneath there. And while we could go in and just say, hey, we're going to fix this undersized pipe just at 49th Street, we believe that the right thing to do, and that's what we do, we believe the Merriam way of taking care of our infrastructure is to take care of that whole system. So in preparation for that 2024 project, we are recommending a 2023 drainage project. In 2025, we've got 2 projects. We've got Merriam Drive, 55th Street to Antioch. So you'll see it by 2025, we will have Merriam Drive from Johnson to 55th, from 55th to Antioch, and then 55th all the way over to Schweitzer. All of those streets will be redone by CARS. And then in 2025, we've got a street and drainage improvement that we're looking for SMAC funding. It's really a series of small drainage projects that we traditionally budget, but there's so many of them and they're all localized that we're putting them together as one large project, and we'll be seeking SMAC funding for that. I think it's important to look at all of these relatively expensive projects and see that we are seeking out alternative funding sources for them. So all the CARS projects are county assisted road system. They're 50% on the 50 cents on the dollar for construction cost. The I-35 TIF fund will be tapped for the West Frontage Road in 2022. And then SMAC is really the new watershed district. It's just SMAC's a heck of a lot easier to fit inside those parentheses than watershed district. But it's the same thing, though. That's 50 cents on the dollar also. So as we have in the past, we fully intend to have up to 50% of these projects paid for with grant funding. So in terms of the 2021 project, we've got the East Frontage Road improvement. This is a CARS project. It's a $1.9 million project that we are due to receive $850,000 for, with the quarter-cent sales tax, the street and stormwater sales tax picking up the balance of that $1.9 million. It's a mill and overlay, curb gutter, sidewalk, streetlights where appropriate. Anybody have any questions at this point about our major or medium projects?
I have a question. I don't know if you can see us. Bob has one too, I think.
I can't see either of you, but if somebody just wants to ask, we will try to answer.
Well, this is Whitney Yodrich. Can you just go up one slide for me back to the list? So the county funding that we get from these, we probably don't at this point, but have any idea whether or not that county funding is going to dry up as well due to COVID revenue dips, or is that a concern we factored in?
Sure. Basically, the way CARS is funded by one of the sales tax. So basically, if the money is not there, they just won't fund it. So
okay.
We would, what we have to do, and I think we just approved it maybe at the last meeting, we actually give them our 5-year CARS outlook. And basically, we agree to fund them. They agree to fund them. If the money's not there, then we have a conversation at that point in time about the money not being there.
Got it.
But they carry a fund balance also, so I would anticipate that there would be some funding there. But yes, we have had internal conversations about what the impacts of COVID would be. Again, that 2022 project is one of the two is a TIF project, so we would imagine that would absolutely go forward. We carry the balances there. We could pay for that now. We just want to wait till the construction's done.
All right, that's all. Thank you.
Bob,
Yeah, Chris,
somebody said you had a question?
Yeah, Chris, Bob Pape. I assume that these total projected costs were based on basically just mill and overlays and did not include any expansion. In consideration of our desire possibly for improving walkability and bikeability in Merriam, have we looked at trying to add bike lanes to some of these thoroughfares like Frontage Road, 6775th, Merriam Drive, 5th Street? I mean, a lot of these are major streets.
These do not, I do not believe, have bike lanes built into them. The Merriam Drive, Johnson Drive to 55th Street, which we kind of call downtown, we've bulked that number up in terms of the things that we have submitted because we believe that downtown Merriam perhaps could have some things other than a general mill and overlay. But in terms of have we put bike lanes or anything in these, but when they come to design, and these numbers will change. So these are numbers that we put in there that are just engineer's estimate based on what the length of the street is, what the width of the street is, what we think concrete's going to cost. I almost guarantee that your Merriam Drive 55th Street to Antioch in 2025 is going to likely cost more than $2.4 million just because that's how things go. I know it looks like we have a real good handle on that, but that's just the estimate. So what they'll do is once they go to design, we will actually ask for more CARS money. So when we did 67th Street last year, there were things that we were able to add because we said, hey, when we originally talked about this, we didn't ask for this, we didn't ask for that. And CARS has been pretty good about saying, yes, that's eligible, and we will modify the funding for that. Now, how COVID affects all of that, if they'll be as flexible, we do not know yet. But I will tell you that we have not designed any of these projects yet other than East Frontage Road. So, I mean, there's still an opportunity to say if we would like to put bike lanes in there, we can do that. And we just change these numbers. Now, that would change our budget once we decide. But these are all future CIP projects. So in terms of 2021, that's the only real number that you're approving when you approve the budget is the 2021 project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just was thinking, you know, if not now, when, if we're going to try to move down that avenue of increasing especially the bikeability. I mean, I think we've done a great job on walkability throughout Merriam, but I just, you know, now's the time to be talking about those if that's a direction that the council feels we need to go. So
I'm happy to put. I mean, we can have a larger conversation. If I've missed out, I'm not sure that I've been given council direction to do that. We're gonna.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I'm not suggesting that's what you've been directed by council to do. I know the 2040 visioning group is looking at that. I'm not even sure where all the stats are on that as to how important that is to our constituents, but I just want to kind of keep that in, at least in the dialogue.
Sure.
Until, you know, at this point, it's all I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I will. Well, I will tell you. Excuse me. I will tell you. Bikeability has been a part of the conversation of the comp plan. Now we don't have, and there is a public input part of that. So it is quite possible on the tail end of that we would have some of that input from the public that would say, hey, this sounds like something that we want to do. But yeah, from a staff perspective, I have not provided direction to the city engineer to include bike lanes or anything like that, just because I'm not positive that's what the will of the council is or the public. But we are starting to get some of that feedback, so we can decide to have a larger conversation about it.
Yeah, that's it. That's all I was suggesting. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've noted that. Yeah, thank you, Bob.
Hi, Chris. This is Jason Silvers.
Yeah.
I'm going to start off by saying that just to remind people that my campaign platform was to keep Merriam affordable, diverse, and sustainable. And all my questions tonight will fall under those three categories.
Okay.
So my question here falls under sustainable. I see that our East Frontage and West Frontage Road projects are in sequential years coming up. I was curious about how detrimental those projects are and whether they can be shifted, because I have residents who live in my ward on 49th Street who have been experiencing horrible flooding due to drainage on 49th Street. I know they've contacted the city.
Martin.
I don't feel comfortable giving names
Sure.
here publicly, but it just seems to me that if they're having those problems and it's affecting their houses, it might be a more important project to maybe move forward with that project that includes enlarging the undersized drainage if East Frontage Road and West Frontage Road isn't currently damaging property or deteriorating to a point that it has to be done right away.
Sure. East Frontage Road is, I believe, close to being completely designed. Hasn't been out to bid. However it gets designed, we can push that back. In terms of being able to do in order to do the drainage and 49th Street, they need to be done sequentially in separate years. We would need to design the drainage. So if we wanted to move the drainage up, the earliest we could move the drainage up really would be to 2022, because it would need to be designed in 2021. And so then we would, in 2022, while it's being constructed, we would do the design for 49th Street. So the earliest we could do either of those two projects is to move both of those up 1 year, which if that's the will of the council, all that would do is we would then have to push downtown Merriam back from 2022 to 23 to reshuffle, because East Frontage Road, I mean, that's ready to go. I mean, we don't have another design project we could do in 2021. I mean, we have to do something that's designed. So if you'll notice in the budget, when you look at the 5-year plan, we design 1 year, we construct the next. So if you look in the last page of your CIP, under your special sales tax projects, your stormwater and streets, you'll see that those projects are all 2-year projects. So we spend money in year 1 to design, year 2 to construct. So East Frontage is the only constructible shovel-ready project we'll have for 21. So if the council would like us to try to do that, the only way we could make that work would be to we would only be able to move those up a year, I think, as I'm looking at it.
Okay, well, I will just, I guess, mention to the council that this is an issue that has been affecting the properties of people in Ward 1, a small number of people, but people. And if there are other projects that aren't affecting property, whether it's downtown Merriam businesses or anything like that, I would love to be able to push that forward so these people don't have to deal with this for 3 more years.
I can save that till the end, and we can come back and ask about that when we can all have a conversation about that. Let me write a note down to come back to that.
This is Christine, and I would ask, is that one of the projects, is the project that Jason is mentioning something it's already on our list somewhere?
What he's talking about is in 2024, there's the 49th Street Schweitzer Road to Antioch.
Okay.
That project, the precursor to that project is the one right above it, the 50th Terrace in England to Kessler. Those projects are really married together. So, and they have to occur in sequential order. And we would need to do the drainage project first, which would require design in the year before. So if we move that up to design in 2021, the earliest we could do the drainage project would be 2022, which means the earliest we could do the 49th Street project is 2023. So we could move those up a year. We would just have to shuffle the CARS projects. And if we shuffle the CARS projects, we would move 49th Street up to 2023, and then we'd move 55th Street, Merriam Drive to West City Limits. Likely down. I would need to talk to Jim and see what the urgency. I mean, there's a reason we do these in this order. So I would need to really talk to Jim about can we move these around. Likely what would happen is we would move Merriam Drive. So the downtown portion of Merriam Drive, we'd have to move down to 2024, because I believe that 55th Street has some more pressing issues. So we would put 55th Street up. So imagine just moving 55th Street up to where Merriam Drive is, moving the Kessler drainage, moving 49th up, and then we would move Merriam Drive. So we wouldn't do downtown until like 2024.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not prepared to make a decision like that based on this. I just wanted to know where they were written about so I could look at them. Thank you.
Yeah, I would tell you that we're very well aware of what's going on 49th Street, and we are comfortable with the projects budgeted where they are.
I'm going to have to echo Christine Hand's comments. Many of these projects, I mean, they're very difficult to compare. For example, you talk about people getting their basements wet or water on the properties, and compare that with a let's say a road project that has a real high traffic count. We have reasons why. I mean, it's going to impact a lot of people, potentially thousands of people, if we allow a road to deteriorate. It can be problematic. There's reasons why these streets are on this schedule, and it's obvious this is a 5-year schedule, and we've had other residents who've had problems, who've tried to interject their project into these projects, and it creates a rippling effect, which makes you have to question, do we want to upstage the entire process, rearrange it for the needs of just a few people? I'm not saying their needs are not important. What I'm saying is what you may be asking us to do can be a lot more, going to create more problems than it solves potentially. That's why it's very difficult to make decisions to change this. It's a 5-year budget that continually changes and gets readjusted. But when you talk about taking entire projects and putting them off for a year, it's something we'd just have to carefully measure. And certainly none of us are probably going to be in a position to make a determination on that with the little information that we have.
This is Jason Silvers. I appreciate that. I just wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't throw it out there. So
Sure,
I understand that these things are planned far in advance and possibly locked in, but I still felt like I needed to bring it up.
Great. That's good. That's a good thing. That's your job.
Yeah, and I'm happy to work with Jim in the next couple of days and see what it would look like in terms of what the 5-year, what these projects would look like if we shuffled them all around. I mean, we've had those conversations. We are acutely aware of what's going on all of these streets, and this was where we were comfortable with it. But I'm happy to look into it and see if we can't move them around and just shoot a follow-up email out to council, let them know that this is still our recommendation, or hey, we could move this around and it wouldn't change much.
Thank you very much.
I'll write myself a note on that. Okay, let's see. So East Frontage Road is what we have in 21. That is, again, that's the only shovel-ready project we'll have in 2021, because again, we design in 1 year and then we construct in the other. So for our minor projects that's in the 5-year CIP, we've got 5701 Merriam Drive, City Hall exterior improvements, Streamway Trail extension, West Vernon Place PES. The 3 that I have underlined there, I just wanted to call attention to, because those are projects that really have been carried over, or at least the funding has been carried over. I do a call out on the 5701 Merriam Drive, so we can discuss that on the next slide. And then the City Hall exterior improvements, I've got a call out on that, so we can discuss that also. We'll have an opportunity to discuss it specifically. The Streamway Trail extension is the Brown Park, comes south of Brown Park, goes through some property that the city owns, and then comes out at Knox. It's a project that was budgeted in 20 that we have deferred to 2021. So that's funding that's currently in the budget. We don't actually have to allocate. I think it's actually important to point out that the Merriam Drive, the City Hall exterior improvements, and the Streamway Trail extension, all of that funding is funding that actually already is sitting in the CIP. So that actually helps us, because we don't have to make that transfer into the CIP to cover these projects. They were funded in 20, so all we're doing is letting that funding carry over. I'll explain the $500,000 on the 5701 Merriam Drive here in a second. The West Vernon Place PES, so that is, we have an unfunded project and have since about 2012 for some drainage issues in West Vernon Place. So we have a preliminary engineering study that shows that basically what's going on with water in that neighborhood cannot be solved. You know, you might be able to mitigate it in some areas, but the PES really looked at the neighborhood as a full system and said, clearly states, we can't solve the problem. This is surface water. You've got water that comes from Sherwood Forest through backyards. You don't have catch basins in there. We can address some of those things, but we can't address all of them. As we were having conversations about our sidewalk program with some of these neighbors, I'll give I guess the credit to Councilmember Neal. He had asked if there was a possibility that instead of looking at the neighborhood as a full system, could we look at it if there's not perhaps a tiered listing of solutions, like perhaps we could address the standing water in some rains that hit the people at the bottom of the hill, but it's not going to address the water that flows through backyards from Sherwood Forest, or can we address water that jumps the curb in certain locations of that neighborhood, but we don't address standing water in this part of the neighborhood. And that in the existing PES, which we've been basing whether it's an unfunded or funded project, that preliminary engineering study did not look at it that way. But I think based on some different things that are occurring in that neighborhood, and perhaps some things that have changed just over the course of the last 12 years, it's worth taking another look. So that's what this is. This is not a commitment to do the West Vernon drainage. It's simply to give us some more information so we can decide, is there some sort of a solution that we can provide some relief for some of those neighbors, because when looked at as a full system, I'm not sure that we can solve all of the issues that they have in that neighborhood. So that's what that particular expenditure is. And that would be that's a new expenditure. That's not a carryover. Then we also have our annual programs, which you'll notice in your CIP booklet is that in the past, mill and overlay projects, we just called it the mill and overlay program. We budgeted $650,000 or so a year, and we didn't really spell out what we're doing in those. We've tried to get a little more specific. We clearly internally know what streets, what they rate. We know what our rating of our streets are. We know about when we think we're going to need to replace them. I've kind of pressed the CIP crew that if we could share that with the council and we could share that with the public, we think that that's a little bit more informative, so people realize that, hey, your street's on the list. Now, I will tell you that the streets that we think are degrading at a rate that we're going to replace them in 2025, some of them may end up on 2024, some of them may end up on 2026, some of them may have a failure in 2023 that they get pushed up to 2022. But I think that I like the way that these projects are now spelled out really as projects. And one of the other things that has occurred is that we have traditionally had these annual maintenance programs of mill and overlay, which is street, residential streetlight, which are streetlights, small drainage when there's drainage related, sidewalk when there's sidewalks. And we have looked at this quite often as 4 different projects, but when they overlap in a neighborhood and we're doing all of that, the neighbors don't look at it that way. The neighbors look at it as, that's a project. How come I'm not aware of this project? So what we've really tried to do is we've created these mill and overlay program, or these mill and overlay projects as opposed to a program, where we take some funding from sidewalks. If it needs sidewalks, we take a little bit of funding from drainage. We take a little bit of funding from residential streetlight. And you can see now that that's reflected in these projects. I like the way that that's presented. Mill and overlay projects is really the best we could come up with in terms of names. It's really a street rehab program, and maybe that's what we'll call it going forward. But it is the old mill and overlay project, and we want the council to know that we still intend to mill and overlay all these streets and take care of them, as well as put new street lights in and make drainage improvements. But we're going to start calling them out as projects. I just think that makes a lot more sense. If you'll recall, last year we had a Schweitzer project, and Schweitzer had funding from 4 different sources, and we were kind of looking at it as 3 different things. But the reality is it's just one thing to the residents. It's a project, and we need to call it as such. So I'm pretty excited about that. I think that's an upgrade in at least how we communicate how we're spending CIP dollars. So our mill and overlay projects, that's still in our 5-year CIP. Residential streetlight program, that is the conversion of the existing KCPL lights over to LEDs. So we're converting those to LEDs, we're converting them to LEDs, but we're converting the KCPL poles to our black decorative. Once we are complete with that, which we think we'll be done with that in 2024, that funding source, similar to sidewalks, will transfer to a conversion program. So we will go back and the existing black decorative poles, we will convert the heads to LEDs. So we are installing LEDs now, but it's just on the poles that we are converting to finish out the residential streetlight program. Hopefully that was clear. If not, I apologize, but we are converting things to LED. It's just what we're starting with are going to be the non-black decorative poles when we change the poles over each year. Small drainage projects, those are things that clearly, if we can budget those out, we can, but there's a lot of things that just pop up. You know, there's a hole appears in a yard, street fails, it looks like, you know, somebody's yard starts to sink, we need to have maintenance dollars available to deal with those on quicker than a 5-year CIP. So we budget money each individual year for those. Same thing with maintenance, the sidewalk maintenance and repair. This was the first year that we started our maintenance and repair. We hit some neighborhoods up in Ward 1. I think sidewalks look pretty good up there. We will, going forward, just go back into where we have our worst sidewalks, and we will repair them or replace them. A little more proactive than we've done in the past. So any questions about this minor project summary before I move into specifically 5701 Merriam Drive or City Hall exterior improvements? Okay.
Yeah, Bob, this is Bob Pape. I just had a quick question, Chris, in reference to all of the things that we've listed out that have dollar figures assigned to either cars or to SMAC. Or is the county locked in, or is that just what we think they will give us when we get ready to do that project? Or are we got their money tied up as we have our money tied up for these projects?
Well, they have committed. Basically, that's what we did. I think it was at the last meeting. We basically said, here is our 5-year list of programs. Here's what we think they're going to cost. And then the county commits that they're going to their 50% of construction. Those numbers are going to change. Again, by the time we get to the 2025 projects, those numbers change. So they know their numbers are going to change too. It's basically, we're just committing to one another, similar as we did with Turkey Creek, you know, that, hey, we find value in this. We're committing funding to it. Yeah, there's $1 assigned to it today, but holding them to that dollar doesn't mean a whole lot because it's going to change. 50% of construction cost is going to change because the value of construction is going to be more or it's going to be less. So the way CARS works and SMAC, they're eventually going to just give us a cap. The closer we get to doing those projects, they say, we're going to give you $851,047. And then that number's locked in. If we decide at the last minute, oh, hey, we want to add this or that, that's coming out of our pocket. Because they've committed to that. At some point in time, they have to lock their budget in, but it's as you get about a year out from the project.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you. I thought that was the case. I just wanted to make sure we were all thought that was.
Yeah. Once you get about 5 years out, they're committing a dollar figure. It helps them in their long range planning also, but they also understand that those numbers are going to shift a little bit. I'm sure if we come in and we decided we were going to expand, you know, 55th Street to 6 lanes and it was going to go to a $10 million project, they'd have an issue with it. But I mean, they recognize that there's fluctuations in the cost of construction as you move through time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move into future 5701 Merriam Drive. So this is kind of an assessment. I'll go ahead and read it, although I'm sure you're all reading it also. 5701 structure is unoccupied. It doesn't have an intended use currently. And based on what we know about the structure, as well as what we know about our revenue projections, the cost of saving part or all of that existing structure, it's cost prohibitive. It's going to be expensive. Citizen committees studied the future of the site, made some recommendations to City Council. The city's received bids to remove the entire structure and will soon make a determination on acceptance of a bid. Whether the structure is removed or not, there will be a cost to the taxpayers to plan and implement a solution that takes into consideration how the property best benefits downtown Merriam and our residents. Because of that last sentence, whether the council votes to remove it or not, and we will bring a recommendation next week that it be removed, we're going to need to do something with that property, in my opinion, in terms of planning it. So in 2021, we're suggesting $200,000 be placed in the budget for essentially a study. If we've applied for PSP grants with Mark, that's Planning Sustainable Places, we would use some of that money for a grant match. We would also use that perhaps for any 2022 cars, assuming that the downtown Johnson to 55th cars project still stays in 2022. In 2021, we will be designing that. So we would anticipate wanting to have some downtown conversations about what would the community like to see downtown. So we would also tap that funding for that. And then in 2022, we've got a placeholder there for implementation. Now, whether that's there are things that occur outside the scope of cars that cars won't pay for. Or if we get to the point where we decide that it's time to start implementing the 5701 recommendations, assuming that it's torn down, we're putting that placeholder in here. The reason that number is $500,000 is because we currently have $650,000 in the 2020 budget that was approved last year. We spent $20,000 of that. So we have $630,000 left for 5701. We are going to be bringing forward next week a bid for demo that will not exceed $130,000. Assuming council accepts that, there will be $500,000 left in money in the bank right now. There will be $500,000 sitting there. We're not recommending that we spend any of it this year. I think we still need to kind of be conservative in what we spend. But since that $500,000 there, it's already earmarked towards 5701. We'd like to carry that money forward to 2021 and 2022. So again, this is funding. We're not asking, we are simply asking that this money that's already in the budget be reallocated over the course of the next 2 years. I'm sure there might be some questions about this or thoughts or opinions, so I will cede the floor. Anyone?
This is the mayor. I was just going to say that's been my belief and understanding. So I don't know that unless somebody has something to add, or they don't agree with it or want to discuss it, I think this is kind of what we've already talked about and believe is the process.
Okay.
Oh, this is Christine. I don't have anything new, but I think I'm looking at CIP projects as of 5/19/20, and the way that lays out the budgeting, it then ends up with a total of over $1 million. And I don't think that was what you just told me.
Yeah, it's not. That's correct. That is somewhat misleading. But this is the same funding.
Okay.
To put this money in the budget when we haven't, to assume that council is going to spend any of that 630. There's individuals probably on the call tonight who had an issue with decisions being made before council made decisions. So
right.
This is the same amount of money that is already in the budget, but I wasn't going to put in the budget sheet that you had spent anything you hadn't spent yet.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions about 5701? Okay. Next project is our City Hall exterior improvements. This was originally approved for the 2020 budget. Just as a reminder, this was really a partnership with the Art Committee for Art Project number 4. We have a conceptual planning process that's been completed that staff and the Art Committee members helped us out with. You can see the original 2020 funding sources. We took $200,000 from the public art funding and then $100,000 from the CIP funding. This is really because we're not going to spend it in 20. It just disappears into unallocated fund balance within the CIP. So it's just being reallocated. This was the original source of funding. That's why I wanted to put in 2020. But again, this is a 2020 expenditure that's not occurring. So we're just pushing it to 2021. Just as a reminder, this is what we're talking about. We're going to change some wayfinding, add some cladding, a little bit of architectural design to add a little something to it, add a little bit of color out front, and soften that first parking spot and create some overflow for court, or just really kind of take the industrial book warehouse architectural look of City Hall and try to soften it up a little bit. Again, this was approved as part of the 2020 budget. We just we decided to defer this. This is a COVID related deferral. Didn't know if anybody had questions or concerns or issues about this particular item.
This is Whitney. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
If we find that we do need to cut more corners than we thought, is it possible to strip this scope to just the ADA improvements and enhancements Are they combined in one?
Absolutely. One of the themes that you will see, and we will send out clearly these presentations that we're making tonight, but one of the things that you're going to find is there's not a whole lot that I'm going to share with you tonight that if COVID is still a reality come November and December, that we can't strip out of the budget or delay. That's by design. If we don't think that 2021 is going to look like we think it's going to look, absolutely. This is a 2022 project. This is a 2023 project, or this just isn't a project at all. And we come back to it once we figure out when it makes the most sense. So, but yes, I believe that we can get down and we can just do some ADA improvements around this project. Likely, we would probably just scratch the whole project, to be quite honest with you. But we would have that conversation with council at that time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Chris, this is Meredith. Can I jump in on one thing?
Yeah, please do.
So there are no actual ADA issues with the front of the building as it stands right now. It's just as we make some modifications to the front of the building, we would want to make sure those modifications are ADA compliant. So there are not outstanding ADA issues that need to be addressed in this space.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your question, Whitney, or give you more information than I could?
Indeed. I'm good.
Okay.
And I would just chime in that let's remember that the Public Art Committee was very excited about doing this and using the project money to make it happen. So it is about softening and beautifying. It's artistic.
Agreed. Well put. Yeah. Our intention, our hope is that everything we present you this evening comes true, and we're able to do all of these things. So we're not, and I know this isn't what you're saying. We're not presenting these strictly just in the anticipation of COVID occurring, and we just are trying to put some things up there we won't do. We fully intend to do these. These again, these are we value these things. That's why they're in our budget. We fully intend to carry out on them and implement them as approved by council. But just again, so you're aware that we have somewhat structured this budget around the need to be flexible if need be. But well put, Christine. I agree with you. I look at this building every day. I would love for it to be softened.
Well, I just was chiming in with Meredith's comments to say, and this is why it is a project, is because the art committee said we want to do this. So.
Yeah. And kindly funded it. So they, agreed. Any other questions about our City Hall exterior improvement project? Okay. So here's our 2021 construction summary. Our East Frontage Road project at $1.9 million. We intend to go forward with our mill and overlay program, which is Goodman, 55th, 51st. I think there's two other segments of street in there. That's our mill and overlay program at $650,000. Small drainage at $350,000. City Hall exterior improvements at $300,000. Their Streamway Trail extension at Brown Park, $264,000. Future 5701. We don't know exactly what that'll go to. Probably more planning than construction. Sidewalk maintenance repair at $150,000. Residential streetlight at $150,000. It's important to point out that, well, some of those numbers look smaller than they have in the past. That's because we've embedded those in the mill and overlay program. So the mill and overlay program actually has some of that streetlight program money, has some of that sidewalk maintenance money in it, has some drainage money in it. So some of those projects actually, instead of increasing the budget, we've taken money from those budgets, because that's where it was going to come from anyway with our mill and overlay program. When we would go in, as I shared, we would look at it as 4 projects, but really it's really just 4 funding sources. So again, to make it a little bit more transparent and enhance the way that we communicate that to the public, that's why those numbers are less. We are not necessarily putting less money towards sidewalks. We just have $150,000 or $150,000 for residential streetlights left over after we put streetlights and sidewalks in these other projects. Hopefully that's that makes sense. That wraps up our project sheets for our 2021 budget. are there any questions about our projects? Okay. Not hearing any. I'm going to jump into the financial highlights of our CIP. And so kind of talk a little bit conceptually about how we forecast the 5-year CIP. So in order to figure out what that CIP, what we can fund to it, first thing we have to do from a process standpoint, what's the outlook of the general fund? What's the general fund look like? Because clearly we have reserve, fund balance reserve policies in there. So how much can the general fund transfer to the CIP? We need to figure that out. Another thing we need to figure out based on, I think Donna shared last week, how much payments go to GEO bonds. I think she made she compared that to our rent payment and our utility payments. Those are things that are required. And then what must the CIP contribute to the bond payments? The bond payments come from several sources, one of which is the CIP. So we need to know what that amount is. And then we need to figure out what our CIP projects cost. And then we can determine, is the CIP funding available? CIP funding traditionally comes from these sources. So we have a 1% city sales tax that up to half of goes towards the transfer into the CIP. We've got a 1/4 cent city sales tax for streets and stormwater that our residents reauthorized, reapproved this year, which is fantastic. City share of the Johnson County Courthouse sales tax. This was passed, I want to say over 10 years ago, and a piece of that county sales tax comes back to cities, and we have committed that portion to go and fund CIP. Actually, the courthouse tax, I'm sorry, that is more recent than 10 years ago. I think the courthouse tax is the one that passed a couple of years ago. Grants from county, state, federal governments, that's going to be your CARS, your BR STIP, your SMAC, any CDBG funding, those things will fund our CIP. And then available TIF funds. If there's TIF funds that are not, have not been committed to redevelopment projects, then they go into the CIP. Now they have restricted uses. They have to be used for things that are in or are very close or relate to the TIF. So if you'll recall, we used TIF funds on some of 67th Street last year, the bridge, those things fall within the TIF. So we're able to use TIF funds for that. And then I think I shared with you that our West Frontage Road projected for 2022 will be paid for out of the TIF because it falls squarely in the TIF and supports our dealerships. So that's our traditional funding sources for the CIP. I'm sure no one can read this, but it is in your CIP book that I believe it is the last page. That is where we determine, okay, these are the projects that we see in the 5-year plan that we need to do, that we need to accomplish taking care of our infrastructure. Once we put all that together, we can start to put together a forecast of what the fund looks like. Over on the left, you can see those are our sources of revenue. We have a beginning fund balance. We have interest. We've got transfers from the general fund. That's that half of the 1% sales tax, transfer from the I-35 TIF, the 1/4 cent sales tax for stormwater, streets, miscellaneous, and then intergovernmental grants. Down under expenditures, I'll draw your eye to the bond and interest fund. I think it's pretty exciting that in this 5-year plan, you can see from 2023 to 2024, the transfer drops considerably. The reason for that is that we will be retiring our Series 2012 bonds. Those bonds will be paid off in 2023, and then the only bonds that the CIP has to pay for at that point in time, we would forecast at this time to be for our community center. One of the exciting things, at least to me from a long-range planning standpoint, is that, we're only 2 years off of having a CIP that has the last year of our community center bond payments in it. So we end at 2025 right now, but in 2 years, we'll have a 5-year CIP that has the last amount of money that pays for that brand new community center that just opened today. I mean, that's pretty fantastic. You'll recall that the whole reason that we did that was we felt like we could commit CIP funds to do a 10-year bond versus a 20-year bond, and that saved millions of dollars in interest to residents in our community. Now it does come out of our CIP, but we felt like that made a heck of a lot of sense considering we had spent the previous 15 years really moving and grooving on converting all of our streets to modern profile streets. We were putting in sidewalks. We were changing over streetlights. And we felt like we had a period in our history where we were going to be able to just maintain streets and not have to rebuild them. And that was a perfect window where we could take those dollars and we could pay towards the debt on that facility. So that's pretty fantastic that in 2 years we're going to have the last of our debt in our 5-year CIP plan. So I'm pretty excited about that. So it's important to talk about our project expenditures. What you're going to see here is in the 5-year plan, I included 2020 in here, really just to be quite honest with you, the effect that Upper Turkey Creek has on our expenditures and on our fund balance. So this looked cool when it was a PowerPoint because I didn't have to scroll up and down. I could just move back and forth. But you can see there, second from the left, that royal blue color. That's the $5 million that is in our CIP, and $1 million in 2023, $2 million in 24, and $2 million in 25. And you can see how that really pushes our expenditures out, assuming that those projects happen in that project happens in those 3 years. You can see as you go between here to here, if you take Turkey Creek out, it actually brings everything back down to about an average of $4 million in terms of our expenditures, which is that's a good place to be. That's where we have been and really where we need to be at this point in time. So again, just to kind of show the effect of Turkey, what it does on our expenditures, and not just our expenditures, but on our fund balance. So what you have here is our fund balances for our two major project funds within the CIP, our general projects, and then our street and stormwater. You can see our 20 estimate, 21, and 22. They're all holding relatively steady. Yes, we're spending a little bit of fund balance down, but in 2023, 24, and 25, you can clearly see the cumulative effect that $5 million Turkey Creek project has. You've got $1 million in 23, 2 in 24, $2 million in 2025. And so our fund balances between those two accounts, well, in the overall account is $15 million at the end of it. If you look at the far right on the green line there, in our projects and stormwater account, we're really down below 3. That's not a super cause for alarm. It's also, I don't think that $5 million expenditure is going to happen. But I wanted to share this with you and really put it in contrast to what this chart looked like last year. So I stole this from last year. Again, this would be a heck of a lot more impactful if it was a PowerPoint, but I'm going to have to scroll for you. You can see if you look to the far left, that lower line now, instead of being 0, is negative $3 million. So you can see that starting in 2022, as of last year, and then 2023 and 2024, Turkey Creek really impacted our fund balances in those two CIP accounts. And that was because we did not anticipate a street and stormwater renewal. The fact that we got the street and stormwater renewal takes that from the last 3 years being below, going negative in those accounts, to actually taking them from somewhere between 6 and about $2.5 million, which is fantastic. That's just simply to share with you the impact that street and stormwater renewal had on our CIP, and what the impact of having a Turkey Creek project in there does to the budget. Again, if you were to take that $1 million out of 2023, take the $2 million out of 2024, and the $2 million out of 2025, you actually start to get more of aligned with 2020, 21, and 22. So not necessarily to cause alarm, but Turkey Creek having that in the end of the budget it has an impact on our fund balances each of those years, assuming we actually do that project. Last slide I'm going to share is our 2021 debt service funding. As I shared a couple slides ago, as you can see on the left there, from the CIP, we are transferring $1.2 million out of the CIP towards debt service funding. That it was by choice. That was, I still think, a wise decision that saved taxpayers millions of dollars on a 10-year bond versus a 20-year bond. The quarter-cent sales tax also pays off some of that debt service to the tune of $1.8 million. That the quarter-cent sales tax that voters approved in 2017, I believe. We'll pay almost 60% of that debt service. And then there is about $200,000 that comes out of the property tax. There is a small piece of our mill levy rate that is designated specifically to bonded interest. So again, just sharing this with you so you understand that $1.2 million is going to debt service funding in 2021, again, by design, but that's clearly a large expenditure. CIP next steps, and I'll ask questions if there's questions after this. Any feedback that is provided tonight will be incorporated into the final program. We will sharpen our pencils and do any homework if we hear anything back from you tonight or over the course of the next couple of days, so that we can make sure that you're comfortable and you understand the budget. The program's a plan. It requires changes over time. As I've said before, what we think is going to happen in 2025, likely, even if it happens, it won't cost what we think it will now. Well, it is a 5-year plan. It's really 5 one-year plans. You are approving 2021 as part of a 5-year plan. So you're really approving both at the same time. And formal approval of the 5-year plan occurs as part of the 2021 budget. That being said, I am happy to answer any questions. Actually, I think I wrote a note here. Did we want to have a conversation about moving CIP projects around, or do you want me to just send an email back out to everybody that says what we can and can't do? I'm not sure I know what the right answer to that is.
This is Christine, and I think that we should definitely we should definitely get Jim and Carl and whoever else, the engineers' input before we try to say, oh yeah, let's move this and let's move that.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think we need to have a conversation and just see what we can do. Now, I just want to make sure it's clear that because there's an engineering year and then a construction year, we can't move it up to 2021. The earliest we'd be able to move everything up would be a year. But I will go ahead and see what kind of information I can get on that. We'll send something back out to council. Let me make sure, let me go over my notes just real quick before I turn this over to Donna. So we're going to work on what I just shared in terms of moving projects around. Have some conversations about bikeability. And I did get a text from Brian that said that there is a pretty robust portion of the comp plan that talks about bikeability. So likely we'll have some good feedback to chew on in terms of future projects and how bikeability relates to our CIP plan. Any other questions, comments about the CIP? Again, I think it reflects our values. I think it reflects our goals and objectives. It is aimed on progress, as our mission statement is. It does give us a backdoor in case COVID is not projected to be gone come 2021. Allows us to defer some of those things while still taking care of our streets and doing the things that our residents expect. If there's no other questions, well, then I'm going to turn it over to Donna and go on mute and drink some water here and wipe the sweat from my brow. Take it away, Donna.
I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, as we begin talking about the operating budget, I think much like, okay, just one second. Okay, can you see my screen or no?
No.
We could see it a minute ago.
Yeah, it disappeared. You had it for a while.
Okay, here we go. I'm assuming it's back now.
Yep.
Tonight we're going to kind of talk a little bit about all the different funds. We really highlighted this last week, but just kind of hit on those. And then go through those things in the draft budget that really are the new things, much like Chris talked about just a few minutes ago. A lot of the majority of the budget are those things that we do every year. You know, we pay police officer salaries. We have salt so that we can take care of our streets, etc. And so we're not really going to talk about those things. We're going to talk about the things that are different this year. Then we'll kind of show you an overview of all the funds and look at the budget calendar. So right here is the structure of our funds. And kind of like we talked last week, you have your general fund, and that's where all of those revenues that aren't specifically designated to go into a fund, they collect there first. And then from the general fund, you decide how much of it you're going to do on your operations, like your police, your fire, your public works, and how much of it you want to send to some of these other funds to set aside for projects. So we have our general fund, and we have our risk management fund, which is really lumped in somewhat with the general fund. And that's really for if we have a case of someone sues us, we could use the money out of that. Although really the majority of times what this is used for is we have an accident and insurance will pay part of it and we'll pay like our deductible out of that. That's largely, but still we want some funds built up and set aside in case we do have a larger claim. Special revenue are kind of funds are kind of what they sound like. These are funds that have a designated specific revenue source that have to be spent a certain way. Special highway fund. That is funded by the gas tax that you pay whenever you go and buy gas. And it has to be spent on maintenance of streets and highways. You have your special parks and rec and your special alcohol fund. Those come from a liquor tax. And the state says you have to spend 1/3 on parks projects, 1/3 on alcohol rehabilitation programs, and then 1/3 of it you can put in your general fund and spend on whatever. Your transient guest tax fund, that's the funds that we collect from the hotels. So it's kind of a bed tax. That goes to fund the Merriam Visitor Center. Its kind of purpose is to encourage and promote tourism within your city. You have a debt service fund. That's where you accumulate resources to pay off your principal and interest on your bonds. And then you have your 2 capital project funds, your capital improvement fund, which is what primarily funds the capital improvement plan Chris just talked about. And then you have your equipment reserve fund, where you gather resources to fund major equipment like a fire truck or police cars. Or I know this year one thing we're paying out of there is to replace all the city's radios. So big equipment purchases are made there. So just to summarize, most revenue goes to the general fund. The general fund primarily pays for your operating, but it also sends money to some of these other funds to accumulate resources to do other things. And much like Chris said, please feel free. I don't care if you even interrupt me. If you have a question, just jump in there and let me know. Okay, on to the draft budget highlights. I'm going to kind of start off where we left you last time. And I think this was one of the very last slides you saw that said the 21 draft budget is going to include no increase to the property tax mill levy, 3% salary increase, which is slightly less than where it's been traditionally, but that was kind of done as a result kind of COVID and just sustainability issues. No new employees have been requested, and then it provided funding for these additional projects. So let's kind of look at all of this a little more in depth. Oh, and then also we left you with our chart that talks about really affordability. Can we afford the things that are in the budget? And we talked about how we started off this year with about almost 8.7 million over in our fund balance, which is our funds that we can use to make things happen. We think in 2020, we're going to bring in about 14.6 million. And we think that we're either going to have operating expenditures or we're going to transfer to some of those other funds and provide funding to them of about 17.6 million. And we'll end up with about 5.7 million. And of our statistic, the fund balance as a percent of operating revenue, that puts us at about 39%. So unless there's questions about anything so far, I'm going to go ahead and jump in a little bit further. Okay, as we go through and talk about revenues, I think this is a good depiction of what we see happening with revenues. You can see 17, 18, 19, we had increases in overall revenues. In 2020, because of COVID, we're seeing this decrease. If COVID hadn't happened, this little dotted line with the arrows is where we see that the trajectory would have been for revenues instead. So if we're assuming they're still gradually going up, then we would have been about, if you go to the bottom point of that line and you go straight up, that's about where you would have been in 2020. And then we think our 2021 would have been higher, even so. So while we are predicting somewhat of a recovery in 2021, we're still below where we would have been without COVID. I hope that makes sense.
This is Jason Silvers. I do have a question. The dotted line that projects where we would have been, does that take into account our grocery store closing?
Yeah, it was already closed. When we put together the 2020 estimate, the grocery store was already calculated to be closed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Y'all, I can't hear Donna.
Yeah. Donna, we can't hear you. Oh. You just kind of. I'll come down to your office. Hold on.
I hope that wasn't my question that did that.
Well, while we're taking a break for technical issues, I know we talked about this and Donna talked about it, but I am still hearing so much that makes me think we're not going to recover so quickly. I mean, just nationally. I don't know about us. And I don't think we've really seen it when the unemployment stipends go away, which they're projected to this week. I'm really very concerned that we're taking too many happy pills.
Yeah, we absolutely have taken that into consideration and into account. I think that we can.
Chris, is this
Okay,
any better?
that's great. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that no, we have, as we've looked at the different scenarios, I will tell you that we would consider this to be pretty conservative in our estimates. We assume COVID's still around, most of the first quarter of next year, and we base our assumptions off of, and hopefully I'm not stealing anything from Donna, but I just had a flash that I better be prepared to cover for Donna if it all fell apart. Pretty much what we have done is we've looked at 2019 and used 2019 as a basis for revenues and then dialed those back. And the reason that we're at where we are is because of new retail. So we believe that we know that there will be assessed valuation growth. And Donna's going to go through all that, I think, in the next slide. But she's going to explain to you how we got to these numbers. But this truly, it may not be conservative as much as conservative as some people would hope it is, but we actually, there's a method to our madness.
Tell you what, Chris, let's go ahead and go and look at the next slide, because I think that kind of helps depict where we're seeing increases. Here we go. Okay. So if we're comparing budget to budget, we can see that we are increasing the property tax 4.8%. We'll talk about it in a minute. And sales tax is going up. We'll talk about that in a minute. We've got some decreases in county sales tax and franchise fees and motor vehicle tax. The franchise fees, a portion of it is coming from when all the different utilities merged into Evergy. There actually were some savings on utility bills, and so we've seen that impact our franchise fee revenue. This charges for services, which is a large factor in why we are seeing stronger revenue, is directly attributable to the community center. And right now we're going to be open less than half a year. And so we're thinking that next year you're going to be open a full year. You're going to have more programs over there to collect revenue from, a full year to get memberships from, etc. And so we're really seeing about a little over a 50% increase in revenue from it. And so I hope that kind of clarifies a little bit more where some of the revenue is coming from. And in fact, let's just go ahead. We can see this is the general fund revenues. We can see our sales tax and our county sales tax. It's about 50%. We have our property tax, etc. here. And then when we look at the property tax in particular, the mill levy's remaining at 27.765, but our assessed valuation actually increased 4.3%. And when your assessed valuation goes up, your revenues go up. And based on the tax lid calculation, we could have generated 5,958,000. But in order to do that, we would have had to have adjusted up the mill levy. And instead, we've made a pledge that we're not going to do that. And so instead, it's at 5,905,000, which keeps us at the same levy that we've had before. This is the general way that the tax lid is calculated. I'm not necessarily going to go into any detail on this. However, if you're interested on how the formula works, then let me know offline, and I would be more than happy to sit down and talk to you about it. And then on our general fund sales tax, you can see we are showing some recovery. We are showing recovery, but we are below the 2019 levels even, and even with the new retail that we're anticipating getting. I think that Chris, your concern about when is COVID going to go away is certainly a valid concern. And I think that as we go forward and we talk about expenditures, I think you're going to see that what we've included are really just the basics, and we've added some of these extra projects, but these are things that could be pulled back if we need them to be, which was a deliberate act by myself and Chris, so that we have that flexibility that right now 2020 is still anticipating that we're going to have a couple more months of being down 80% in sales tax. So far, we've been nowhere near that. And so I would say 2020 is very conservative, and that I think my gut would say that number is really going to be higher. And so as we go forward, we'll see. And I think in the November timeframe, we're going to have a whole lot better picture of where we really are going to end up in 2020 and what makes sense to really approve and fund when we go into the 2021. But I would anticipate, and Chris, please feel free to jump in here with your thoughts, but I would anticipate in November, we will need to have, somewhat of a discussion with you, City Council, and have this slide and expenditure slides updated and have okay, that's where we thought we were going to be. This is where we are. What are we actually going to fund going forward? And so
if I could add.
Yes, please, Duke.
Yeah, I was just going to say all a good explanation. I think the critical thing to keep in mind is that really what we need to approve when we approve the budget is we've got to establish a mill levy. We've got to establish what the property tax rate's going to be. The sales tax we have less control over. So what we have control over is we've got control over what we believe that the mill rate should be and what we certify with the county clerk, and then we can control our expenditures. As Donna has shared, and I think I shared a little bit during CIP, one of the, I don't know if benefits is the right word, but I think one of the things that we're going to experience, or at least one of the benefits that we have, is that COVID exists right now. So as we get closer to 2021, I mean, we have to approve a budget now, and we're in the same, kind of the same boat that everybody else is in. That we have the benefit of, as we get closer to 2021, we can make adjustments. We can go, hey, look, this is worse, or hey, we think it's going to go into June versus into March, or I mean, we have the benefit of being able to adjust on the fly. But I think again, the budget that we have designed is one that I think is, I don't want to say hopeful, but I think it reflects reality, but it's also somewhat malleable if it needs to be. If things turn out, which I still believe that this is a somewhat conservative budget based on where we should have been, we can change. We can, you know, there are things that we just won't do and we'll just push off. And the good thing is we'll know. I mean, we will know walking into January 1st of 2021 when the new budget season starts. Hey, you know what? If that means we're not going to do a large project, or it means that, hey, unfortunately, and I'm not proposing this, hey, we can't give raises this year, or hey, we're going to do away with all these new additions, we'll do it. We'll do it just like we did this year. So it does provide us a bit of flexibility in the fact that we know that this is something that is already occurring. But we do have to set the mill rate, and we have to kind of take a realistic stab at what do we think the world's going to look like anywhere from 6 to 18 months from now. So that's kind of my comments on all of that. But we clearly, if council believes that we are too rosy in these estimates and would like something that reflects a little more of what's the doom and gloom of right now, we can. But as Donna shared, I mean, we're still projecting. We're still projecting some 80% decrease months this year, and we've not changed those. So when we anticipated 80% decrease in sales tax last month, and it came back at 30%, we didn't change the next month. We still assumed our initial projections. So we are overly cautious. And again, every single time that it is not the doom and gloom 80% decrease scenario, that's actually additional funding for the 21 budget. That clearly not funding for, we wouldn't anticipate adding more spending, but it definitely pads the fund balance and makes offsets any sort of bad prediction on our parts for 2021. Hopefully that helped and it didn't hurt.
Thank you both for assuring me. Thank you very much.
This is Bruce Caldall, and I have a question, or maybe more of a statement. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm getting a bit of heartburn when I'm reading here that property tax collections will increase by 5.7%. And I know that's based on increased valuations, and we're not proposing a change in mill levy. But given all of our constituents are suffering through same issues the city is suffering through, I'm having a hard time swallowing an increase in property taxes by 5.7%.
Now some of those property tax increases will be because there is property that is currently not on the rolls because it's being developed that will reach its full assessed valuation when it is complete.
Okay.
So
much is that? Roughly, how much of that 5% is new property?
Let's go back to this back here, this tax lid calculation. And let me somewhat talk through this, because what this says is, okay, we're allowed to increase the amount by $261,000 next year that we would collect. And a part of that is because whenever we calculate how much the state says that we can collect without passing an ordinance authorizing it, it says you can capture to the degree that your police and fire costs are going up. So it's 96,000 of that increase is because of that. And then you're allowed to increase what you collected last year by 1.8% because of inflation, because of the CPI. And then new construction or changed use accounted for 53,000. So really, I guess that would be about 20% of that allowable increase was from new construction. Now, the amount that we actually increased our property tax was 208,000.
Okay, so 25% is new
Right.
construction. And 75% is a heavier tax burden on all of our residents and businesses.
Yes.
Correct.
And is that appropriate in these times?
That is a council conversation. I agree.
This is Jason Silvers. I would just like to mention that as part of my platform and being affordability, I agree with Bruce that this just does not seem like the time to be raising people's property tax.
I mean, whether we change the mill levy or not, when tax bills come out, the city of Merriam just dinged me for another whatever percent.
And this is Whitney
I
Hadrich.
struggle with that.
Sorry, Bruce. I didn't want to step on you.
No, I'm done.
Well, we agree. So, I mean, you know, I was already furloughed once this year, and if it happens again, and then I get a property tax bill that's higher, you know, it's that to me is a sign that understanding that this budget feels conservative. I get concerned when I see that, but then I also see that the Public Art Committee has a project that they want to accomplish that we budgeted for next year. Understanding that a lot of that is inclusive of ADA updates, those need to be done. And I am all for art. And I am art's biggest champion, but you know, that to me doesn't align with increasing property taxes. And I'm sure this is my first time around and maybe I'm not getting it or something, but that doesn't feel right to me.
Would we really be increasing the property taxes? Isn't it based on my assessed value? So it would be depending on what the assessed value is, whether my property tax is going up.
So the amount we collect would amount people have to pay goes up even though the mill levy stays the same.
If your house went up in value, you're going to pay more property tax to the city of Merriam.
Yeah, I think, Bruce, this is the mayor. I think that's true. However, there's a distinction I think that Mrs. Hands is trying to make, is that the city of Merriam isn't raising your taxes. You're paying more taxes because the counties have assessed your property to be more valuable. And we benefit from that, but that's not anything that we have any control over. So the city doesn't raise the person's taxes. You're just paying more taxes because the county has said your property is worth more money. Right. When it's worth more money, you owe more taxes.
Well, if I could interrupt, I would argue that we have almost everything to do with that because we've used that increased valuation to put in decorative light poles and to put in sidewalks and to build parks and community centers and amenities that make your property more desirable, which clearly makes it worth more. We can have that conversation. I have no problem having that conversation. But I think talking about what we have control over the mill rate is because the price of milk goes up, we don't lower the sales tax. Your sales tax goes up because the cost of milk goes up. So I think if we think of it the same way, which I choose to do, then really the question becomes, is that the appropriate level of taxation, not the value of your house? It becomes, is that the right number? I would also point out, and I'm absolutely fine having this conversation. We can go back to the drawing board on this, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that if we can lower our mill, surely we don't have control. Your property mill is 120-ish mills. We control 27 of them. We could lower those 27 down to 20, but your property value went up, and you've got the library and the county and the park district and the school district and the school bonded fund and 20 mills that goes to the state. There are a lot of other taxing entities that have mill authority, several of them larger than us, the community college. So lowering the mill, yes, we can say that we did our part, but it is no guarantee, and this is my point, there is no guarantee that your property tax bill as a resident will go down.
Oh, no, I get that. It will be predominantly symbolic because, you know, if we were to take $100,000 out of our budget here so that we would have a very slight decrease in our mill levy, you know, it's not going to change people's tax bills all that much. But when you look down at it and you see the city of Merriam collected more money from me this year, and this is not a year I have extra money, it just rubs me a little bit wrong.
And we can, Donna, what's a mill? I think we showed that on our charts last week.
A mill is about $100,000, I believe.
So if we gave, I think it's
Or
like
maybe it was 200. I'm sorry, I don't recall, but I can find out.
But I'm going to also jump in here because we've been fighting the fight with, if we ever needed to raise the mill, we have to do a big election and the property tax lid. So anytime there's a big cost, but beyond symbolism, if we lower it and then have to turn around and raise it at a later time. So
that's the other side of the property tax cap. It also tends to turn into a floor.
Yeah. So for me, I want to just not adjust the mill levy. I'll just go out there and say that at this point. Don't want to do that.
Yeah, this is Bob. I'd like to kind of jump in on that as well too. That's exactly what I was thinking as we were having this discussion, was that it not only affects, if we were to lower it a mill this year, and we even have a worse COVID situation than what we think, we've already reduced the revenue stream that we have coming in, and we don't know how long that might project out. What might happen, you know, not just next year, but 2 years from now, when we have to then go and ask for more money, which probably will never happen if we're already in another ongoing pandemic. The other thing I wanted to also just make a comment about is that, and I don't remember the exact figures, but Donna can probably help us out here. You know, we have the residential assessed valuation of like a 11.5 or 12 or something %, and commercials like 27% on assessed value, and those numbers could be wrong. So correct those numbers if I'm wrong, or not even close. But the impact to our residents, not that I don't care about our commercial property, but our commercial property can, you know, sometimes charge more money if they need to make up those deficits. Our residences that are fixed incomes don't necessarily have a way to increase their amount. But I think the people that this would affect the most on a mill levy rate is our commercial property and not necessarily our residential property. I just throw that out.
That's an accurate statement. I just did some quick math on one mill's $205,000 to the general fund. That's the value of 1 mill. So if we wanted to roll it back a mill, that would be $200,000 and $205,000 hit to our budget. What 1 mill does to the average property in Merriam. So if you have a $200,000 home, which is the average property home, 1 mill is $1.87 a month to the average home in Merriam. So we would give up $205,000 to give back $1.88, 1.877 back to the residents, which we can absolutely do. But just to kind of put that in context of what a mill, the majority of the money, as Bob said, is really it's commercial. I mean, we have a really small portion of what our residential property tax is 12%. The commercial property tax is like 16% of all of our general funds. So
Would it
we'd
be
be happy
helpful
to.
for me to bring up the presentation from last week that kind of had all that in it?
Oh, I'm good with it. Don't
Okay.
do it on my.
Chris, this is Scott Debo. Can I chime in?
Please.
Again, obviously, the hard times we're having, and I feel for that because again, I'm a teacher. I'm in that same boat. But I think we got some other things in this presentation that we are looking at that's going to give back to our community, give back to our residents, and help them out in other ways that we haven't covered yet. And I'm correct on that.
We do. I would argue that most of the things in this budget try to give back to all of our residents in one way or another.
Yeah, but we have two new added things.
Yeah, we've got several new added things that we haven't got to. Okay. Yes, sir.
And again, how much that actually is going to raise my tax? I mean, I didn't sit and do the math, but again, is that raise going to help with the value, help with allowing us to help our residents more? So that's what I kind of want to throw in there. Maybe a few dollars, but again, I think those dollars are going to be used wisely and give back to our community. That's all I had.
Thank you all for the discussion.
Okay. Then I will go ahead and go forward. We saw our general fund sales tax. So going through our calculation, if we put in 19.6 million of revenues and we take out that minimum fund balance of 30%, it would say that we can spend up to 19.4 million and still be within our guideline of 30%. So with that, if we look at our general fund expenditures, and a couple of thoughts as we go through this. Personal services, you'll see a 3.4% change. That change comes really from two factors. One being a 3% increase to employee salaries. The other portion being that right now we are going to operate the community center for a little less than half a year. Whenever they were doing the budget last year, they took into account that it was not going to be a full year of operations. And so since we're going to have a full year of operations, that budget does have to increase some so that we have it fully staffed. You'll see that contractual services are increasing 18%. And again, that goes back to the community center in that we will be paying utilities, insurance, grounds maintenance, etc. on the community center for the whole year instead of just part of the year. And so a large portion of that is why that is increasing. Health and welfare is increasing by 70,000. That is attributable to two new grants that we're going to talk about in a bit. So you're seeing total operating increasing by $1 million, but really there's nothing really, I guess, new in here other than the things that we're going to talk about very shortly. And then the fact that you've got a community center that you're now going to be operating for a full year. Transfers out, again, those transfers go back to we've accumulated money in the general fund. And so what funds do we want to fund? What other funds do we want to move money over to in order to fund them with these discretionary revenue sources? And the two primary funds that we send money to are the capital improvement fund and the equipment reserve fund. And you'll see that right now this is showing a decrease in those transfers, but a couple of thoughts with those is that a couple of thoughts with those is that, as when Chris was talking about the capital improvement fund, a lot of the projects that we're funding next year are really projects that were funded in 2020 but are being deferred to 2021, which partially reduces some of the need for the transfer over there. And then with the equipment reserve fund, we had the last 2 years, we've purchased fire trucks, and in addition, we temporarily increased our transfer over to the equipment reserve fund to cover any unexpected costs that equipment that might need to be purchased out of the new community center if we somehow missed paying for them out of the project budget. And so we kind of stocked up the money over there a little bit, built up the fund balance. And so we don't need to do that perpetually. We've already done it. So that's where kind of some of that savings from the transfer outs is coming. So when you look at the total general fund with the transfers, then the general fund budget's going down $670,000 a year. One other comment on this slide is you'll see there's a contingency of $25,000. I just like to budget at least a small amount in contingency. That isn't really all the contingency you have, because you could bring in all of your fund balance if you so wanted to, but I just like to budget a small amount. And over the past 5 years, you've spent $25,000 or less of your contingency, so I just kind of threw that amount in there. So I'm assuming there may be questions about some of this, so I'll open it up for questions if there are.
I have a question.
Okay.
Chris mentioned that you still are forecasting an 80% decrease for some months going forward. How many months for the remainder of this year are you projecting that 80% decrease?
2 months.
2 months, thank you.
Which would basically be May sales and June sales. And then for the rest of the year, it's at 50%.
And I just point out, just for so we kind of get an idea of how conservative that is. In what we would consider to be the worst month, which was April, it was only 30% down. So that kind of gives you an idea when you're talking about a $8 million revenue stream. We're projecting to, we're giving it a big haircut that we really don't think it's going to take. I mean, clearly there might be things that are happening with the pandemic now that might reverse some of that trend. We're also aware of the fact that there might be some supply chain issues with automobiles. But as I said at the beginning of this, with all of the incentives that were out there for automobiles and the fact that a large portion of the automobiles we sell are luxury brand, they have not had the same type of hit. Clearly they've had a hit. That industry is hurting like every other industry, but it's masking a little bit of what's actually occurring in some other sectors of the economy, the way that the automobiles and the low interest rates are affecting the sales of those. But we're still projecting, again, a pretty conservative drop in those sales.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then This is kind of a depiction of what types of programs where the money goes to. You can see 15% goes to fire, 27 to the police and court. You've got 2.7 going over to your capital improvement fund and your equipment reserve fund. Admin and council, your community development, etc. So if you put in the funds requested of 19,368,000, then you wind up with a 30% of operating revenue. And one thing that, as we look at this, that Chris and I have discussed is that in this scenario, in this COVID world, you're actually increasing your fund balance by 220,000, but your percentage is going down, which doesn't make sense when you first look at it. But that formula is a percent of revenue, and so the lower that your revenue goes, the lower the fund balance you need to keep it above the 30%, which is not, in my opinion, isn't maybe the best measure of how you're doing with the fund balance. And I know, and let me say, doing it as a percent of revenue is a totally legitimate way to do it, and cities, some cities do it that way. When I worked at Overland Park, and I know some other cities, they use as a percent of expenditures. And Chris and I have talked about, once the budget's adopted, we really want to go back and kind of take a look at this statistic and come back with you, get back with you like September, October, and talk about whether we want to leave this as a percent of revenue or if we want to change it to something different.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that, yeah, clearly this looks wonky, but it is because this, I'm sure the root of this policy, this council policy, did not take into account 2008 type of events, 2020 type of events. So what happens is when you go from a year where you are hurt revenue-wise to a year that's anything above, your percent of revenue that the policy spells out as being your fund balance or minimum required fund balance, it changes. So we are within policy. I will tell you that we absolutely believe that we're going to have more fund balance at the end of this year. Well, I'll also tell you that the thing to keep in mind about the ending fund balance for 2021 is based upon the fact that we're going to spend 100% of our budget, which I will tell you that we never spend 100% of our budget. So I'm pretty sure that we are going to end up with more than that fund balance. I think a good illustrative is in your budget book. If you look at the difference between budget and actual for fund balance, on some of those, you can see the difference can swing sometimes up to $1 million in fund balance because we don't spend everything that's budgeted, or we end up getting good costs, or people retire and we don't hire back people at the same cost, and all of those little things add up. We also don't do what we call Christmas in December. We don't just go, hey, because there's money left in the budget, we spend it. I mean, that is something that we absolutely are very conscious of in any time, best of times, especially these times, but I mean any time. So I will tell you that this is just for illustrative purposes, that we are maintaining a 30% fund balance as 30% of revenue, but that number will end up higher. Any questions about that?
Okay. So we talked about the property tax mill levy, 3% salary increase. There's no new employees requested. Looking at how the salaries and benefits kind of shook out, we can see that salaries again are going up 4%. Again, as we've already said, that's from raises and budgeting a full year at the community center. You can see that benefits are actually showing that they're going to go down. And what generated that is that back last year, the city was facing some large increases in your health insurance cost, and staff actually went out and put it up for bid. And instead of there being this increase, there was actually a 10% decrease in health insurance cost. And so we're seeing quite a bit of savings this year. We are forecasting a 10% increase this year, but even with that 10% increase, you're still overall going to be pretty flat on your benefit cost. So overall, personnel services cost of 2.5%. So that brings us down to the funding provided for some of the new things, and I'm going to let Chris talk about that.
Yeah, this is a slide that we shared at the end of the last meeting. I'll turn my video on here in case somebody wants to look at me while I'm talking. This is the slide that we shared at the end of the last meeting last week. It was last week. So I'm just going to run down the list, and then I'm going to dive a little bit into some of these, but I'm really going to dive into the last one, the grant opportunities. So for the 2021 recommended draft budget, no increased property tax mill levy. The 3% salary increase, I think it's important to point out that that's a 3% increase in the budget. We traditionally budget about 4.1%. So this actually is a decrease. So we are, our employees are going to get a 3% increase this year versus a 4%. We believe that still honors goals and objectives to take care of our employees. We believe that that's in line with our neighbors. This is about where they're pegging their recommended increases for employees. Again, this can be played with until the end of the year, or played with at the beginning of the year if things are not what we think they will be. And again, we're not requesting any new employees. So the things that are above and beyond what we would call our maintenance budget that we shared last week in the snapshot is council member communication stipend. We've heard from several council members about the great efforts that they go through to communicate with their residents. And after researching what some of our neighboring communities do, we believe that a communication stipend would be appropriate and aligned with many of our neighboring communities. So it's $2,700 addition to the overall budget. So it's $25 a month for council and mayor to basically offset the cost of, your cell phone, your internet, a couple reams of paper that you might buy to reach out to your constituents. Some of you may have websites or may someday have websites. So we put this in here because, again, it looks like we were lagging behind in terms of what some of our neighbors were doing. So we believe that, again, that modest $25 a month is appropriate for the efforts that you folks make.
Christopher?
Yes, ma'am.
This really still irritates me. So this is giving us a raise, right? So this is taxable. It's a benefit that I get to turn into IRS.
I would imagine so, yes.
And so I don't know. It still bothers me, probably because I've been living without it for so long and don't see the need. Just say that.
we can remove it if if the council does not believe that that's appropriate. Staff again took a look at what our neighboring communities are doing, and this seemed aligned with what they were doing. So that was why we put it in here. In terms of the tax liability of it, I mean it's $300 a year. I don't know what the liability is on that. I apologize.
Chris.
I have a comment.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Bruce, do
Hello?
you want me to go first, or do you want to
Go
go
ahead,
first?
Whitney. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'd like to propose that we get rid of the stipend increase. I feel like that's irresponsible to have it this time, and that money can be put to better use.
I agree, 100%.
Well, it's not a done deal, is it? Just because we put it in a budget, we still have to approve it.
Yeah, but we will not go back in at the line item level to approve. So if this is something the council would like removed, now would be the appropriate time to let us know, or let us know via email in the next couple days.
Well, I personally would like to have it removed, but even if we don't remove it, we will still have to have a motion at a meeting to approve it, right?
No, if you tell me if you can get 2 more council members on the line to say they don't want it, it's gone.
Yeah, I'd say take it out. I'm on board too. I think it's a small gesture, but I don't need it. I mean,
I don't need it.
Yeah.
So that's
This is Jason Silvers, and I don't need it either.
5.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is no longer in the budget.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The next item is City Council Chambers video meeting project. So this is, again, this is for AV equipment and a service to really, once we get out of COVID, to be able to do something similar to what we're doing right now, and that is to make our meetings more accessible and available to the public. So this would be to equip the council chambers with some sort of equipment that we could broadcast meetings. I don't know exactly how that would work. If there's specifics, I think Meredith would be the expert. One of the things that I think we would try to also include in this would be to include the training room upstairs. So work sessions that we would be able to have them televised at some sort of level also, probably not as robust of a system as the council chambers, but that would be what this is for. So this is really an effort to hit our council goal of trying to increase connections between residents and the city / council members.
Chris, this is Jason Silvers. I just had a quick question about the chamber video meeting project. I'm all for it, but my question is, what issues do we have with it, since that space is also used for the municipal court?
We simply just would not, we just wouldn't turn the system on when, we would just only turn the system on when we're having meetings.
But are there legal issues prohibiting having those cameras in that space?
No, there are not.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on our chambers video project?
well, Bob. I just say I think it's a good idea that we video. Anytime we can communicate with our constituents and let them get online. I think this Zoom thing is working out, where we know what kind of turnout we get in our council chambers. So at least, if nothing else, I think we're giving them the opportunity as another means to know what's going on with city government. So, I mean, I support it.
Agreed.
Hey, I have a process question. This is Bruce. All of these projects are just funding. They still have to be approved at a city council meeting, correct?
Yes, we would come forward with some sort of a contract, likely on some of these. Some of these would be small enough that once they're approved. Well, let me start this over. if it's approved in the budget, it's essentially been approved to be funded. If council policy requires that we have a contract that requires it to come forward, then yes, it would come back to council. So for example, the polling software is $6,000. If there's not a contract and that's simply just a software that we can buy off a shelf, which I don't think it is, that would be, we could do that at the staff level. So something like that, because of the value of it, would not necessarily need to come back to council. So by putting it in the budget, there is the collective will of the council to move forward with that.
Okay, thank you.
Which leads us to the polling survey software. This is a follow-up from the conversation. I think we had a work session a couple weeks ago where we talked about polling and surveying and ways that we can enhance the connection between the city and its residents, and what's the appropriate ways to do that. This is the funding to actually find a solution and implement that. Don't have a whole lot of detail about that, just like I don't have a lot of detail on several of these, other than that we've looked and we believe that this is the appropriate amount of money to accomplish that.
And we still have some control over how often it's used and how complicated it is and all of that.
So
the council.
We have not even arrived at a product yet. This is simply, as we've looked at the different things that are out there, we believe that this funding will allow us to get to the point. But yes, we would fully expect, I would fully expect that the council, it would be the council's will to send the question out more so than staff's. Strategic planning process. One of the things that came out of our early spring work session was that there was a desire to have a strategic planning process. We're going through a comp plan process, which is more of a land use process, although there will be some things that come out of there. Again, as we said earlier, bikeability, we're going to be focusing a little bit on downtown. There's the possibility of having some larger conversations about downtown as part of that 5701 budget. So having a larger strategic planning process about what is the future of Merriam for our residents to really take an active role in, and to help define what we'd like this community to be, more so than just land use or one particular part of town. That was something that we took away from, again, that work session. So we believe that we can get a strategic planning process set up for 2021 for $70,000. So we're proposing that go in the budget. Any questions about that? Electric vehicle charging stations, that's something that comes right out of our goals and objectives. Meredith and Caleb from facilities have done a lot of legwork on this, and we believe that at City Hall and the marketplace, we can install EV charging stations at each of those locations. I think we may even be as far as kind of had a tentative bid just to kind of really lock in on the price, but we believe we can get 2 charging stations at those 2 locations for $10,000. And we continue to have conversations with the library about, at the community center, when the library comes on board, if it's possible to partner with them to put something down there. It may be or it may not, in anticipation of having EV stations down there. We have the conduit, which is essentially the infrastructure you need put into the garage, that we could do that at some future point in time. So again, we believe this meets a council goal. Any questions or concerns about this item? Okay. Next item is our ETC citywide survey. So 3 years is up. Every 3 years we have an ETC citywide survey where we send, I think it's about 6 or 7 pages of questions out, all of them pretty much the same year after year, so we can measure progress in terms of people's perception of the city, their trust in the city, trust in city leaders, value of tax dollars. It really, from a staff perspective, maybe perhaps more so than the elected perspective, it really gives staff a perspective of what people believe of the services that we offer, and gives us an idea of where maybe we are lacking, falling behind, and it compares those to national, metro, and Johnson County benchmarks. So we do that every 3 years, and next year we're due. And that will cost $22,000. We do that with ETC. So we have placed that in the budget. That is also a council goal, I believe. If it's not this year, it was for years in the past.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is typically in the budget to just do a residential survey. This amount includes doing a survey of our businesses as well for the first time.
Yeah, thank you.
That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. Any questions about the citywide survey for our residents or businesses? Okay, our last item of kind of our, new services, or kind of value added, value statement type services, are 2 additional grant opportunities that we have. Next slide, please. So we still anticipate funding the existing grant programs. We still have the Exterior Home Improvement Grant, which has been successful in the budget, the Neighborhood Island Grant, and the Block Party Grant. We don't anticipate changing anything on those. Those seem to be working pretty well. We're lagging behind a little bit on them this year, but that's to be expected with what's going on with COVID. But we have received nothing but good feedback on all of those. But we are proposing that we do 2 new grants, which also is spelled out in our council goals and objectives. The first grant is, next slide, please, is a Historic Downtown Exterior Grant Program. Downtown being defined as, Turkey Creek on the west, BNSF tracks on the east, just south of Johnson Drive, and then just north of 57th Street. So just the south end of the bus garage up there as being historic downtown. Similar, it's going to be similar to our residential exterior grant program. The eligible improvements are pretty much going to be exterior improvements. So you're going to have painting, siding, door, window replacement, masonry repair, awnings, building additions, any sort of landscaping if it's on their property, and foundation repair. We would also recommend that we allow floodproofing. Floodproofing would be the only interior improvement that would be allowed, but because it's downtown, and this kind of dovetails with the conversation about what are we going to do about, what can we do for ourselves about taking care of downtown as opposed to waiting on the federal government. But we think that if people wanted to do some floodproofing, that would be a good idea. The improvements would need to meet the architectural design guidelines for the city of Merriam, so we actually have that all spelled out. And if there's any floodproofing, it'd need to meet FEMA standards. So ineligible improvements would be interior other than the floodproofing, and any residential improvements in downtown, those would be ineligible. So it would be a 20% reimbursement grant. So the minimum grant would be $1,000. So that'd be a $5,000 investment in downtown Merriam. $1,000 would be made by the city, $4,000 would be a private investment. Maximum grant of $5,000, so that'd be a $25,000 total investment in downtown. Restrictions on that would be 1 grant per property every 5 years. And then if someone owned multiple properties down there, we would only allow 1 grant per property owner per year. We wouldn't want somebody to come in on the first day who owned, 3 or 4 parcels and take up all the grant funding for their particular properties. We are proposing funding at the $50,000 level, and we would likely stagger these grants a month or maybe a little bit longer from the other grants. This grant we would start this in February as opposed to January, just to kind of create a little bit of separation for staff time to process the other grants. So again, we think this is a grant that really helps revitalize and spark a conversation about downtown Merriam. I think that if people were going to fix up some of those properties down there, they would have already done it. So I think having the city play a role in that in our commercial properties, just like we do in our residential properties, might spur some additional development, even if it's perhaps additional improvements just simply to sell the property to someone else. But that is really the origin of this particular grant. We still need to work a few things out on it. Clearly, all of these improvements would need to meet code and regulations and ordinances and things like that. But this is a grant that I'm pretty excited about. I'd like to see. I hope that it works. It'd be fantastic if we used all $50,000. One of the things we've talked about is maybe partnering with the Downtown Merriam Partnership and seeing if we couldn't expand the uses of this. We have not had the opportunity to do that simply just because of COVID, but we would reach out to them and see if either we couldn't share just funding or if perhaps they could fund other areas of downtown, perhaps south of Johnson Drive. But for what we're proposing right here, we would just be talking about what is traditionally known as historic downtown. If there's questions, and I'm guessing there would be, I'm happy to discuss those.
First blush, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. Are we thinking that David Easley, Neighborhood Services, is the same person who's going to be handling this?
Yeah, it would yes. I mean, all of this is going to have to fall pretty much into his lap, in the community development department's lap. So again, you know, we try to be mindful of the staff load, but also balance the staff load with the greater good of what we can do in the community and what's the best ways to direct, you know, some of this funding for the long-term viability of downtown. So, but yes, to answer your question, yeah, he's on the hook.
I'm really excited to hear
it. Is there any does this give anybody heartburn? I mean, and not heartburn perhaps just because of COVID in the year, but in terms of is this a grant that perhaps oversteps the role of the city in a philosophical type way?
This is Whitney Yadrich. I think the philosophical support is that we need to help these people if we're still waiting on the federal government. And so I agree with Chris that this is really exciting. And, you know, if there's a way to even, I mean, this is its first year, but see how it goes and potentially grow that in future years if it's successful, I would love that.
This is Jason Silvers. I kind of want to mirror what Chris and Whitney said. My only question is, do you expect any blowback from any other Merriam owned businesses that aren't in the downtown area, as seeing that this is maybe favoring a district?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. We that is a question that we asked ourselves. It's a question we struggled with, and ultimately the answer we came up with is that, well, yes, if I'm a business owner outside of the confines of historic downtown, I might feel like that is occurring, and perhaps they wouldn't be completely off base. But the reality is that we have asked the community before if they value downtown, and they passed about 20 years ago a downtown sales tax. So the community at large believes that we should be, or at least at one point in time believed, that we should be focusing some of our efforts and, to be quite honest with you, their dollars in this part of town. That was not a sales tax that we renewed, but it did help revitalize and spend some money downtown. So I think we have kind of taken the approach that the community at large has in the past spoken up, or at least last time they were asked, and said, we believe in this. So I know that's somewhat evasive because, yes, if I have a business that's outside of that area, I'm going to feel like I'm being left out. But I think if you were to ask the community where we should focus this money, would they say any business or would they say downtown? And I think if you get into any business, how do we keep that money from going to, you know, Hobby Lobby or Jack in the Box? I mean, do we say small business? Okay, well, how do we define small business? So going with a geographic area seemed to make the most sense to us. I'm sensitive to the question, but I think that the public spoke the last time we asked them, and I think giving this an opportunity to see how it works gives it the opportunity to expand. So again, I'm sorry if that's evasive, but if I'm a business owner outside of here, yes, I might be a little upset that I'm not getting an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, you said exactly what I thought was the realistic answer. I was just curious.
Yeah, I'd just like to make this Bob, I'd like to make a comment in reference to this whole 50,000 downtown. I think one of the things that that makes them different from not just a historic perspective itself, that's the oldest portion of Merriam that we're concentrating on, but they're also in a floodplain where most of the businesses, or maybe no other businesses in Merriam, is in a floodplain, which kind of gives them a different reason why we would want to invest in their properties or help them and reinvest in their properties, I should say. Just comment.
No, I think that's a great point. That is why we included flood proofing, because you are correct. I mean, almost all of at least the western edge of the confines of what we call historic downtown, they're all in the floodplain. So yeah, this definitely gives them some assistance in getting out of the floodplain. It's a good point. Okay, if no other comments on historic downtown exterior grant, we'll go to the next new grant that we are proposing. And that is our residential sustainability grant. We have a council goal to start focusing on sustainability in the several different ways that sustainability is defined. This one, we're clearly talking about energy. So the residential sustainability grant would be used for reimbursement for the installation of energy saving systems. Those would be defined not by the resident, but by the 2012 IECC, which is the International Energy Conservation Code. And it would include solar power, wind power, high efficiency HVAC, energy efficient windows, insulation or geothermal. It's a 20% reimbursement. So the minimum grant here would be $500. So that'd be a $2,500 total investment in sustainability, with a maximum grant of $2,500 for a total investment up to $12,500. We do think that this is a grant that would dovetail nicely with our exterior home improvement grant, where you might have someone that would come in and they would apply for some exterior home improvement, perhaps roofing or something like that. And at the same time, they could add on some solar, things like that. So clearly these would need to be within our code. We are starting to look at some of those things to ease up how these things could occur. So we would need to make sure that we're in alignment with those. But we think that the implementation of this would be very similar to the residential exterior home grant, and we're proposing funding to the tune of $20,000. I'd be happy to answer any questions that we have about this, or if this is not the direction we'd like to head.
And we think dovetailing makes, I mean, I know they're really two different things, but dovetailing makes more sense than saying you can't take a big bite of this apple and a big bite of that apple at the same time.
If the council would like us to have these be exclusive of one of the other, we can modify this. We just felt like someone, if someone's coming in and they're requesting siding or they're requesting windows, well, if high efficiency windows or the siding could go with, insulation on the other side of the siding, we just felt like these two things went together pretty well. And I think that the point of our grants, at least in the initial phases of the concept of them, is not necessarily because, we're only reimbursing about 20%, is to try to get people that would normally do $5,000 worth of work to maybe do $6,000 worth of work, and maybe that we're going to do $10,000 worth of work to do $12,000 worth of work. Because again, going back to the assessed valuation of homes, I think all of these things not only improve, this is sustainability, but as these things start to spread throughout the neighborhood and we eliminate code violations and things like that, blight in certain areas throughout town, that improves property values. And well, yes, there might be a correlation of property taxes to property values. I would argue that's what we're supposed to be doing, is improving property values. We're supposed to be dumping tax dollars back into the infrastructure of this community to make it, to continue to create a vibrant community that people find desirable. And so, yeah, I mean, by combining these two things together, not only are you improving perhaps a codes issue, but you might even take that codes issue to the next step and actually become greener. I mean, become a little bit more sustainable. That's the thought. You know, if that's something that council wants us to, again, we haven't put, these will things that clearly will have to be fleshed out if they're put in the budget before we roll them out to the community. So I mean, we've done a fair amount of fleshing these out, but if there's some fine tuning we need to do, we can put it in the budget and fine tune it at a different point in time before we put it out if we're close in terms of concept.
I think it's a great concept, and I like you're starting at a low enough level that we'll be able to see if it doesn't work. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
I think this is a great program. Obviously giving money back, that's what I like about this. Giving people an opportunity to improve their property, and we're helping them out. And I like that.
Same, Coach. I love it.
I'm on board too. Wow.
Me too.
And I just wanted to mention, because we have been asked, I didn't want council members or members of the public to think that we had neglected the council request in the past about aging in place and accessibility type grants. We are still funding the minor home rehab and the home program at the county, which are both grants that provide homeowners the opportunity that can't necessarily make improvements on their own to do that. The minor home rehab program actually is about installing devices and performing modifications to make a home accessible. I know we've talked about grab bars in the past, so I wanted just council to know that while we are adding these grants, we are still funding these other county grants that do some of those more aging in place type of modifications to home. And maybe the public's not as aware of them as we'd like them to be. We will continue to focus on pushing that information out, and as opposed to duplicating some of those services, trying to find out if there's sort of a niche that we can get into with some of these other things to make sure that we're giving money back to our residents and helping improve their lives.
Chris, this is what I was referencing earlier when we were talking about increased property taxes and so forth. I think we as a city and as council members need to make sure that we promote this. This is a great one. This is money that we're paying already. Okay, their tax money is already going to this. They need to know about this. For our conversation this afternoon, I got a better understanding of what it is. I didn't really realize it because I've been kind of through this whole process of our establishing grants. I always thought they were a little too high. And again, everybody kept saying, that there's these county deals. And I got an understanding of that now. We need to promote this. We need to promote this hard. Because I think this is a good thing. This is a great way for people to stay in their homes, to get things fixed, get ADA things taken care of if they need, wheelchair ramps, just all the things that will allow them to stay there as long as they can. And we know that longer they can stay there, they're going to save money. So again, this is what I was referring to as giving back. I think this is something we got to do, and we got to really promote well. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Scott's referencing the county program that we do funding for. You'll find it's in our general overhead budget in your budget book. That's not this particular grant, but I just, again, appreciate the comments, Scott. Is that, there are things that we could do a better job advertising.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've got to do a better job, a much better job of this, I think. But and not just staff, but I think I know I'm going to. Again, I would encourage the other council members to do this too, because I think this is a way for them to get some easy money and get some things to stay.
Yeah, we'll try to put something together that we can push out to council so that they can share in their channels, and we'll concentrate on doing a little bit better job of pushing this information out, or at least pointing people to it, or make it a little bit more accessible.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Next slide. So just as a summary, our proposed 2021 grant program: exterior home grant, $50,000, neighborhood island grant, $10,000, block party, $3,500, historic downtown, $50,000, and residential sustainability grant, $20,000. So clearly that's an investment in our properties and our neighborhoods throughout our city, that, I mean, I think what we've done so far has been very successful. We would anticipate that what we're proposing would be successful. Staff is behind recommending and pushing these, and hope that council hope that they meet the council goal of looking at innovative ways and grants that we can help people do things that perhaps they wouldn't do on their own, or would not be able to do on their own.
Chris, can I back up one step? When
Yes,
we
sir.
talk about the county programs, that is income-based too now. So again, I mean, there's going to be people, and those are the people that, and we talked about, property taxes, the COVID has hurt them as probably worse than others. So again, I want to make sure that's out there too, that it is income-based.
Yeah, the minor home rehab program, and I'll share all this information. That is income-based. There are income guidelines, so that are people that generally are in need. And it's to do exactly the thing that you've mentioned, and Councilmember Pape and several other council members have mentioned, is to really age-proof homes. It's to make it so you can age in place. Any last comments on our proposed grant programs for 2021? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Donna to take it home, and then I'll just share a couple closing thoughts at the end. Thank you very much.
Okay. Just to kind of quickly highlight a couple of the other major funds, bond and interest fund. We kind of hit on that a little bit during the capital improvement discussion, but you can see funding of $2 million, a transfer in of $1.2 million, and principal and interest of $3.2 million. So transient guest tax, again, this is the hotel tax that you pay. We can see that revenue of about 500,000, expenditures of about 537,000. I think in the past that you have discussed this before, but this fund really, even pre-COVID, has some sustainability issues in that the revenues have been below expenditures. And this year, as we were looking at it, we certainly scaled some of those expenditures back, but going forward, this is one that we'll have to kind of watch. The Visitors Bureau is funded out of this, and a lot of the special events like Merriam Drive Live or Turkey Creek Festival, those kind of things are paid out of this. The Equipment Reserve Fund, again, we can see that this is funded largely through a transfer from the general fund. And if you look at the expenditures, you can really see where in 2019 we had larger amounts of expenditures because we were buying those 2 fire trucks. And now, and really through the next 4 or 5 years, we're down closer to 600,000 instead of over $1 million.
Excuse me, Donna. Donna?
Yes.
This is Brian. I have a question on that Equipment Reserve Fund.
Uh-huh.
On the 10-year major equipment replacement schedule for next year, under the Merriam Community Center, there's a line item that just says other and $200,000. What is that for?
That really is, and you can see it here on this as well. This is really more of a contingency line item. It's if, as we begin operating the new community center, or if there are capital equipment that we realize that somehow we just didn't budget for it, this kind of gives an allowance to cover whatever that may be.
Okay.
And so
It's not just, it is not just a slush fund. It is really by design. It is in case there is something that we missed that I'd like to tell you we're 100% sure that we bought everything that we needed to operate this facility, that we don't have a spike in our budget when we realize that there's some sort of weird something that makes something work. I mean, we don't believe we're going to need it, but we think it's prudent to have it just in case once we get up and operating, we realize, oh, hey, wait a minute, we need a different kind of set of lane ropes for something that we didn't know because the pool didn't open in 2020. So I mean, I that won't be the case because we have lane ropes, but that's why that's in there. We do not anticipate spending that, but it's really a contingency because we just don't know, to be quite honest with you.
Okay. Could you change, maybe call that contingency instead of just other?
sure.
Okay.
Let me write that down.
Okay. And so if we look at all of the funds that we talked about that we have, and I'm not sure how easy this is to read. Hopefully you're able to read it. But if we look at all the funds in total, we can look over at that final column, the totals, and we can see total revenue of $26,529,819. And if we go towards the bottom, we can see total expenditures of $26,497,000. So again, we're bringing in slightly more funds than what we're expending, and we're hoping that we can begin to recover our fund balance that we've kind of dipped into, and we're looking at an ending fund balance of all of these funds altogether of $19,632,000. And that brings us to our budget calendar. Chris, I think you were going to take it from here.
Sure. Yeah. Appreciate the handoff. The budget calendar. So as I shared at the beginning, we have July 27th is our council meeting next Monday. We do not currently have it on our very draft agenda for next Monday to talk about the budget. We can, absolutely, and we will if need be. We would basically base that on feedback that we either have received thus far, feedback that you provide us before we end this call, or if we see some sort of strange trend rolling in of emails that make it look like perhaps something was not clear, or there's something requires further tweaking of the agenda. Again, the agenda goes out on Thursday, so hopefully if you have concerns, or if you'd like to come and spend some time with us, or if you have questions that you need us to further elaborate on, we are available. We are committed to doing those things. We would request, if possible, to do them in the next couple days, because if we don't get this on the agenda for the 27th, because of noticing requirements, it kind of puts us to where we might have to have another special meeting somewhere, likely August 3rd, maybe. So we'd have to look. But again, as I mentioned before, you know, this is our recommended budget. We do, again, thank you for your patience with us as we've tried to get a firm grip on what COVID's doing for us and what we think it's going to do for us. We appreciate the comments that you provide us in the direction this evening. It's very helpful to get that feedback from council. And again, I apologize for our new council members. Usually there's a lot more give and take. There's a lot more eye contact. There's a lot more cookies. You know, we have an opportunity to not have to do all this at once. So I apologize, but appreciate the fact that you've been flexible with us on this. Again, this was the opportunity to request feedback from the council, for us to request your feedback. And if we don't hear anything in the next couple days, this is the budget we plan to move forward with. We've got a few follow-up items that we're going to report back out to council. Couple things that we might have to have some future conversations on, and maybe elaborate on some of these things in the future. But in terms of the staff recommended 2021 budget, if we don't hear any differently, this is what we're going to roll forward with. So please, if you have questions or would like to dip into this a little bit more, please take advantage of the time that we have left. And if we have to have a special meeting, we can try to weasel one in the next week or two. It would just be convenient if we could have it next Monday, because we already have a council meeting. But that being said, we'll do one more, open up the floor, and Donna, why don't you turn your presentation off so we can all get back to the Brady Bunch view, and we'll see if there's any. I guess I could turn that on. See if there's any comments that anybody has about the budget or about the budget process that we can enlighten or elaborate on.
Yeah, Whitney, you want to go first? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss more about the project for the proposed City Hall exterior improvements, and just get some feedback from Meredith too, since I know she's been involved in planning that project, on if we can formally move that to a year in the future as a way to be a little more conservative with money next year.
We can absolutely do that. I mean, there is nothing that's waiting on that project other than the fact that we made a commitment to the art committee and approved it as part of the 2020 budget, but clearly things have changed. So if it's the will of the council, I mean, there's nothing internally that ties that other than the fact that it was delayed from 2020. And so we just pushed it a year into the future.
Yeah, I share the sentiment of really wanting to see that done and wanting to support the art committee. But, you know, I also am living with the COVID tension every day. And like Chris said, you know, we have to be careful. Chris Ian said. So I'm interested in hearing about that and see if that's something we could formally push to another year.
So I will add about that project that last year, what we did is we fully funded the community center art projects out of the community center budget, and freed up some money in the art committee budget to do this. So if you recall, there was an intent to do 5 projects, and actually we are doing 6 projects. And so if I think that we could push this back and still fulfill the original intent of the art committee to do 5 projects and to have funded 5 projects, and this could be a bonus 6th project in an out year if that's the will of the council to do that.
And I'm not going to be fighting against deferring, but I would like for us to see what things look like. I mean, you heard my gloom and doom, right? But I would like to see what things look like toward the end of the year before we decide that. It can still sit there and we can move it later, right? Because we're not going out for bid or anything like that. We're not tying anybody out.
That was our belief also, is that those projects, we are budgeting them if we can do them, we're not going to run out on January 1st and send them out to bid and start building in March. I mean, those are projects that likely, there's probably quite a few things in the 2021 budget that it'll be after March or April that we even start thinking about getting into. Probably the only project that we would try to get on very quickly would just simply be our major construction project, because the sooner you go out to bid on those, the better the cost. But in terms of almost every other purchase we're doing, likely we're going to have a COVID list, just like we have a COVID list right now. A lot of the items will be the exact same items.
And we have the design done already for this project, so it is literally just sitting on the shelf. We have all the design plans done with the architect, so we can hit go on it whenever the time is appropriate.
Yeah, Bob, I was just curious as far as, I mean, the project itself looks like it could be done like really late in the year, like, you know, October or something. Even if we'd have as Councilmember Christine has said, we would have an opportunity to know how much money we have. How did COVID impact us in 21? And maybe we just shelve it to 22 or, yeah, I don't know that needs to be pulled, but I definitely think it needs to be pushed way back to the end of the year if we could afford it.
That was staff's intent. Not to interrupt the council conversation, but staff's intent, again, as I shared early on, most of these things that are in the budget are, they don't have to go on 1/1. There are things that we would clearly look at the world that we're operating in. And again, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, we know going into 1/1 of 21 what the world looks like at that point in time. So we don't have to really adjust like we did this year. I mean, we know once 21 starts that, oh, hey, COVID's, you know, it's horrible, or hey, it's, you know, hey, there's a vaccine, or hey, it's the same thing it's been for the last 9 months. So we do have, again, we do have the opportunity to be flexible.
Can I interject here real quickly? I'm going to, my iPad is down to 1% and it will not charge for some reason. And I know we're about at the end.
Terrible battery life.
Yeah. We're about at the end. I'm going to go ahead and sign off and you guys can continue on, but I just want to let you know, I think that our meeting tonight's been great. I want to thank Chris Engel and Meredith and Donna for all the work that they've done. And this is unique. You've asked some great questions. All the new people, the people who've been around for all of these are all the kind of questions and the conversations that we need to have during a budget year. I'll tell you, there's a lot of budget years where we don't have these kinds. So it's nice having new eyes on this and different voices and ideas. And we're going to be a stronger city as a result. So I'm going to check out, and then I'll be meeting with Chris Engel later to see if I miss anything. But again, I'll bid you good evening, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
Now we can talk about the mayor.
Right. Got it. Thank God he's gone.
This guy.
You're still being recorded.
Oh dear. So it is also right that we would vote on this on the City Hall project as it comes forward, even if it is in the budget. So we have opportunity to say no.
Yeah.
Still. Okay,
Yeah.
Wendy.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm just, you know.
I understand.
What a year. What a year.
I know.
Yeah.
This has by far been the hardest year to project and budget for that I've ever had.
Donna, bless your heart. Because
yeah. Welcome to Merriam, Donna.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know.
I come to town and I bring a virus.
Great.
To the
Donna.
world.
Well, thank you, everybody, for.
Yeah, are there any other? I guess since Mayor's gone, or Bob, if you want to step in, and I mean.
Well, I don't know what the protocol is here, but I guess just as you know, as the mayor said, I too want to thank everyone for all the work they've done. Obviously, all the council has spent a lot of time in looking over these budgets prior to our discussions this evening, because everybody had really good questions, and I think, you know, staff's done a great job of putting together what we can, and under these conditions, I was real hesitant and reluctant to even open up that budget book when to look at it. But then after I was kind of, you know, pleased, I guess, in the sense that, you know, we weren't raising the mill rate. I mean, that was the one thing I was really concerned about not doing, and you guys were able to bring that in without doing that. Kudos for that. But does anyone have any other questions or anything or comments they'd like to make before we ask for a motion to adjourn? If we need a motion, maybe we don't. I don't.
We don't even need a
We
motion
don't need a motion.
tonight.
We're in the meeting. Yeah.
No, I don't. Yeah, I want to make a comment that, again, Stan, you guys did a great job. This, again, I've gone through a situation like this. Well, it's fantastic. And we're still giving things back to our constituents and our residents. And I think that was important, really important. Excellent job.
This is Jason Silvers. I just wanted to thank Chris and Meredith and Donna and the rest of the council for being patient with my questions. A lot of them are because I've never done this before, and I'm trying to learn as I go.
All good questions. No one else? Is there? Oh, wait, yes, go ahead.
No, I'm ready to go to bed.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess maybe we turn over to you, Meredith, to disconnect us all.
Right. Good evening. See you all later.
Good night.
Thanks a lot.